Okay, so this happened to my aunt and uncle Deborah and Tom. It was back in the early 90s, out in Yucca Valley, California. They lived there for years, you know, that dry desert kind of landscape. This wasn't some crazy isolated place. It was a normal neighborhood, houses spaced out but still neighbors, kids playing sometimes in the street, that kind of thing. They were driving home one evening. Sunset, that time of day where the sky is all kinds of colors and the shadows get long, making everything look a little different. Just a normal Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Doesn't matter what day. They were just coming back from, I don't even remember where. Maybe the store, maybe just visiting someone, doesn't really matter either. Point is, they were in their car, almost home. Like they were maybe 2-3 blocks away, tops. They knew the roads like the back of their hand, you know. Every bump, every turn. It was familiar, safe, and then it wasn't. They were just driving along, windows down, I think, because it was warm, even as the sun was going down. Probably talking about dinner or something equally normal, just cruising, right? Then they both saw it, or rather heard it first, a kind of heavy stomping, not like regular footsteps, more like something bigger, heavier, like something with weight was moving, and the sound was kind of rhythmic. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Coming from off to the side of the road where the desert scrub starts, you know, that dry brush and rocks. Deborah said she remembers glancing over, and Tom did too. At first, they probably thought it was just animals, coyotes maybe, bobcats. They get them out there. But it wasn't the sound of animals. It was too heavy, too deliberate. And then they saw them. These things came out of the scrub, just stepped right onto the road. And they were big, not like towering, but bulky, solid, and hairy, completely covered in hair, like, think really thick, coarse hair, dark-colored, blending in with the shadows already stretching out from the sunset. There were 2 of them, walking side by side, in sync, like perfectly together. That's what freaked them out at first, I think, the way they moved. Not like animals at all. Animals kind of dart around or lope or whatever. These things walked upright, like people walk, but different, heavier. Each step was this heavy stomp that you could feel, Deborah said, like you could feel it through the car, a little rumble in the ground. Stomp, stomp, stomp. They were walking across the road, right in front of the car. Deborah said Tom automatically slowed down, braked even, just without even thinking about it, you know. Like when something just happens and your body reacts before your brain catches up. And they just watched these things. Cross the road. Just walking. Purposeful. Like they knew where they were going and nothing was going to stop them. She told me they were maybe 4.5 feet tall, give or take. Not giants, but they were thick, built. Tom kept saying later that they had arms like gorillas, long, thick arms that hung down, even though they were walking upright. He said you could just see the power in them, you know? Like they could rip a car door off if they wanted to. That's the image he kept coming back to, gorilla arms. And then they stopped, right in the middle of the asphalt. Stopped walking and turned, both of them, at the same exact moment, and looked at Deborah and Tom, looked right at them. That's when it got really wrong. Deborah's voice always kind of drops when she tells this part. She gets quiet, and I can see it in her eyes still, even now, years later, like she's reliving it right there in front of her. She said they turned their heads, slowly, like they were examining them, like they were curious but also something else. Calculating, maybe? I don't know. She couldn't really describe it except to say it was wrong. Just deeply, fundamentally wrong. And then she saw their faces, both of them. And that's the part that chills me, honestly, even hearing about it secondhand. She said they had human faces, but not really human. Distorted, maybe. Like if you took a human face and stretched it, made it coarser, rougher. She couldn't describe it exactly, just human-like, but wrong. disturbingly so, like something was trying to be human but couldn't quite get it right. And it was horrifying to look at. She said they had eyes, dark eyes, and they were intelligent. That's the word she used. Intelligent. Not animal eyes, not blank or vacant, but like something was looking back at them. Something that was thinking, watching, and judging almost. It's hard to put into words. They just stared at Deborah and Tom for, she doesn't know how long. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Time kind of went blurry, she said. Everything just froze. The air felt thick, heavy, silent, except for the crickets maybe, in the background, that chirping desert silence you get. But the air itself felt charged, like something was about to happen, something bad. And then, just as suddenly as they stopped, they started moving again, turned back the way they were going, towards the mountains that rise up behind their neighborhood, those dark, rocky hills that look empty and endless when the sun goes down. And they just kept walking, stomp, 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 in perfect unison again, across the road and into the scrub on the other side. And that's when Deborah noticed the dogs. She hadn't seen them before, distracted, I guess, by these creatures. But right behind them, trailing maybe 10-15 feet back, were dogs. A bunch of them. She couldn't say exactly how many. 4, 5. A pack of stray dogs, the kind you see out in the desert. Ragged, skinny-looking things, and they were following these creatures. Silently. That's the thing that got to her, too. They weren't barking, not whining, not growling, nothing. Just following, like they were escorting them or being herded. She didn't know, but it was just wrong. A pack of stray dogs just silently following these things into the desert. And they watched them go. Tom in the driver's seat, Deborah beside him, just frozen, staring, watching these two hairy things with human-like faces walking away, with this silent pack of dogs behind them, walking into the darkness, towards the mountains. And then they were gone, just vanished, into the twilight, into the shadows of the hills. And it was just empty road again, desert scrub on either side, silence, except for the crickets. Deborah said she felt this wave of cold wash over her, goosebumps all over her arms, and this, she doesn't know how to describe it, a feeling of dread, of wrongness, deep down in her bones, like something fundamental had just shifted, and the world wasn't quite the same anymore. Tom, he just sat there for a minute, engine still running, car in park, staring at the spot where they'd disappeared. Then he slowly put the car in drive and pulled forward, like he was in a daze. Deborah said she didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, staring straight ahead, feeling this icy chill. They drove the last couple of blocks home in silence, parked in the driveway, went inside, and it was like stepping back into normal life, but they weren't normal anymore. They were changed. Something had happened out there on that road, something impossible, something unreal. She said the first thing they did was turn on all the lights in the house, every single light, like they were trying to chase away the darkness that had come in with them. The darkness they'd seen out there in the desert, in those creatures' eyes. They didn't talk about it much that night. Too freaked out, I think. Just went through the motions of dinner, TV, whatever they normally did, but it was all off, stiff, like they were both in shock. It was the next day that they started talking about it, trying to make sense of it, trying to explain it, but there was no explanation. Animals, no, not the way they walked, not those faces, people in costumes, maybe, but why? And the way they moved, the weight of them, the presence. They had. Costumes didn't seem to fit. And the dogs, the silent dogs, that part just made it even weirder. They tried to rationalize it, downplay it, tell themselves they'd imagined it, or that it was just a trick of the light, the sunset playing with their eyes. But they both saw it, Clearly, they both felt it. The dread, the fear, the wrongness. Tom kept going back to those arms. Gorilla arms, he called them. He said later, after thinking about it more, he realized that if those things had wanted to, they could have flipped their car over. Easily. Just reached down and tipped it right onto its roof. That thought really bothered him. The sheer, unspoken threat of it, that these things were powerful, capable of violence maybe, and they just walked past. They just looked at them and then walked away, and the question just hung there, in their house, in their lives. For years, still hangs there, I guess. What were those things? They never saw them again, never heard anything else about it from anyone else in Yucca Valley. It was like it happened in a bubble, a little pocket of impossible reality that just popped and vanished, leaving them with this unshakable memory. They told my mom, eventually, and then my mom told me. And at first, I was skeptical. Sounds crazy, right? Hairy, human-faced creatures walking across the road in the desert, like something out of a movie. But then I talked to Deborah and Tom myself, separately, and they both told the story the same way, the same details, the same feeling of being shaken to their core. And the way they talked about it, it wasn't like they were making it up. It was like they were still trying to understand it themselves, like they were still carrying this weight of not knowing, of seeing something that just shouldn't be. And Deborah, she still gets jumpy at dusk. She still doesn't like being out alone when the shadows get long. She always looks towards the hills when she drives home at sunset, just checking, I guess. Even after all these years. And sometimes when I'm out in the desert, or just anywhere quiet at night, I think about it. About those two figures, walking out of the scrub, those human-like faces, those heavy, silent steps, and the dogs, following in the dark. And I get this chill, this feeling like maybe, just maybe, there are things out there we don't understand, things we can't explain, things that are just wrong, hiding in the shadows, walking among us maybe, unseen until they step out onto the road and look at you, and you can't do anything but just watch and wonder, what the bleep? And that's it, that's all they saw. They drove home, life went on, but something shifted that day, something changed, and they never really forgot it. Neither have I, honestly. Sometimes I drive at dusk and I catch myself glancing at the side of the road, just in case, even though I know it's probably crazy. But then I remember Deborah's face when she tells the story, and Tom's quiet seriousness. And I think, maybe it wasn't crazy. Maybe they really did see something. Something else. Out there. In the desert. Watching back. And I still don't know what to make of it. And they don't either. To this day. Story 2. Okay, so this happened years ago, back when I was just a kid, 13 to be exact. Fall of '03, October. Me and some buddies were supposed to have this massive war game thing at my grandma's farm. Grandma lived way out in Wheeler County, Texas. Big place, tons of land, perfect for running around like idiots with paintball guns and stuff. Friday evening rolls around and we're all hyped up. My mum somehow squeezed 6 of us into her minivan. It was chaos, all elbows and knees and screaming about whose turn it was to pick the music. But nobody cared. We were just pumped to be getting out of town and heading to Grandma's. Her farm was, well, it was old. Farmhouse wasn't fancy or anything, just solid, like it had been sitting there forever. She had like 160 acres, all hills and woods and open fields. The kind of place where you could actually get lost if you weren't careful. Saturday morning, sun's blasting in, and we're all bouncing off the walls, split into teams, everyone grabbing their gear, paintball guns, airsoft rifles, some cheap BB guns a couple guys had. We felt like soldiers getting ready for combat, which is hilarious looking back, but man, we were serious about it then. Me and my buddy, let's call him Mark, from church, were on the first team to go out. We were supposed to set up an ambush. We headed out towards this line of trees, a shelter belt, Grandma called it, that cut right across the middle of the property. Real thick, tall grass everywhere, perfect for hiding. We were creeping through the grass, trying to be quiet, getting into position behind some trees to wait for the other teams. And that's when I saw them, movement, down below us, along the bottom of this little hill. At first I thought, okay, that's got to be the others, trying to flank us. But then I actually saw them properly, 4 of them, walking single file, and they were big. Adult big, way taller than any of us. And what was weirdest was they were completely dressed in black, head to toe black, like all of it. Clothes, everything, it was just weird. Black in the middle of all this brown and green. My first thought was still, they're just trying to be sneaky, wear dark clothes, whatever. So I kind of shrugged it off, pointed them out to Mark. He saw them too. They walked along the base of the hill and just disappeared into the woods to our right. Into the really dense part of the woods, the stuff you don't really want to go into because it's all thorny and buggy. Anyway, pretty quick after that, bam, bam, we get hit. Paintballs splattering, we were out. Round over before it even really started for us. Kinda lame. We headed back to the farmhouse, ready to complain about getting ambushed, but something felt off. When we asked the other teams if they'd seen us, or if they were the ones in the woods, they were all like, "What are you talking about? We didn't see you." Total confusion. So I told them about the guys in black. Figured maybe they were playing some weird game too, trying to blend in or something. That's when one of the guys from Team 3, his name was David, pipes up and says, real hesitant like, "Wait, black clothes, like all black." We both told him, yeah, everything black. And he went pale, like he'd seen a ghost. He said, quiet as anything, "We saw them too." Said he and his team, they were way over on the other side of the property, near the north fence, and they'd seen figures in black moving in the same direction, heading into the woods. Same woods we saw them go into. Then, out of nowhere, another kid, this kid Michael from Team 2, says he saw something too. He was near the property line, closer to the road, and he swore he saw something disappear into the woods near the fence. He didn't get a good look, just a flash, but he said it was big and dark and just vanished. Suddenly, the whole war game thing just deflated. Nobody was laughing anymore. Strangers. On Grandma's farm, dressed in all black, it didn't make any sense. It was creepy as hell. Grandma's place was way out in the sticks. Nobody just wandered onto her land, especially not 4 adult-sized people in matching black outfits. It was just wrong. This uneasy feeling just started spreading through all of us. The excitement from earlier was completely gone, replaced by this weird, prickling fear. We started whispering, trying to figure out what it could have been. Maybe some hikers lost? But hikers wouldn't be dressed like that. And hikers wouldn't just disappear into the thickest woods on the property. I don't know why I did it. Probably just teenage bravado mixed with a healthy dose of dumb. But I went into the house, found Grandma's old .22 rifle. It wasn't loaded. She kept the bullets locked up separate, but just holding it made me feel a little bit better, a little less helpless. Like I could at least make noise, scare whatever the hell was out there. Later that afternoon, the sun was still high, but that chill had really settled in. Me, Mark, and David, we decided, stupidly maybe, that we had to check out the woods where Michael had seen, whatever he saw, disappear. The woods near the fence. The woods the black figures had gone towards. We were walking slowly, sticking close together. Every snap of a twig made us jump. The woods were darker in there than you'd expect, even though it wasn't late. The trees were thick, blocking out a lot of the sunlight. It was quiet, too quiet, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunching leaves under our feet. We were whispering, still trying to make sense of the black figures. Were they even human? It sounds crazy now, saying it out loud, but in that moment, with that creeping dread, it honestly felt like anything was possible. And then it happened, just stopped us dead in our tracks. One of us, I think it was David, just pointed, arm shaking, and in a voice that was barely a whisper, he said, "Hey, hey, what's that?" Behind us. We hadn't even heard it move, but it was there, peeking out from behind a thick tree trunk, just its head, peeking around. And it was small, way smaller than the black figures, but still, there. It was a creature. No other way to describe it. Small, maybe 3-4 feet tall, crouched down, covered in brown hair. But the face is what got to me. It was human. Not exactly, but disturbingly close. Like a really weird-looking person. Small, hairy, but definitely, unmistakably, a face. Eyes, nose, mouth, human-like features staring right at us. Before any of us could even scream, before we could even process what we were seeing, it was gone. 1 second it was there, peering around the tree, and the next, just air. Vanished, like it had never been there at all. Just poof. We stood there, frozen, heart pounding. I remember my breath catching in my throat like I'd just been punched. Everything went silent again, except now it was a heavy silence, a thick silence, the kind that presses down on you. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We were just staring at the tree where it had been, staring into the shadows under the branches, trying to convince ourselves we hadn't really seen it, but we had. We all had. Then some stupid part of my brain, that dumb teenage curiosity, kicked in. Against every ounce of common sense screaming at me to run, I started moving forward, slowly, cautiously. Mark and David stayed glued to the spot at first, but then they followed. We crept towards the edge of the trees, where the woods thinned out and opened up into a wider, clearer area. Peered out into the distance, trying to see something, anything. I lifted the .22, brought it to my shoulder, aimed. Not to shoot it, obviously, it wasn't loaded, but just to use the scope. My heart started hammering in my chest. Who the hell was crashing through the woods like that, and why towards me? "Hey!" I yelled. My voice sounded shaky, even to my own ears. "Hello! Is anyone there?" The footsteps stopped, just like that. Silence again. Only the rustling leaves and the birds. Had they heard me? Were they just listening? I waited, holding my breath. Seconds ticked by. Nothing. Just silence. Maybe it was an animal? A deer or something? But deer don't sound that heavy, and they don't usually crash through the woods like they're in a hurry. Thinking maybe it was nothing, maybe just my nerves getting to me, I bent down again to try and find some dry tinder. I needed to focus, get the fire going. Maybe then everything would feel less uneasy. As soon as I started moving again, the footsteps resumed. Exactly the same as before. Heavy, fast, crashing through the undergrowth on the ridge above me. They were definitely tracking my movements. It felt deliberate. "Who's there?" I shouted again, louder this time, my voice cracking a bit. "Show yourselves! I know you're there!" Still no response, just the footsteps. They didn't stop this time. They kept coming, getting closer. I straightened up, scanning the woods on the ridge above. I couldn't see anything through the trees. Everything was dense, thick, but I could hear them, getting closer, closer, closer. Then a thump, a loud, dull thud, and something rolled down the hill, fast, right towards me. I jumped back just in time. A rock, a good-sized rock, maybe as big as a basketball, bounced down the slope and landed just a few feet away from where I'd been standing. It skidded to a stop on the soft earth with a wet thud. That was it. That was no accident. That was deliberate. Someone, or something, had thrown that rock at me. Fear, real fear, not just unease, slammed into me. My hands started to shake. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. This wasn't just someone messing around. This was hostile. The footsteps on the ridge stopped again, but now I could hear different sounds. Footsteps below, closer to the camp now, circling around me, moving through the trees, stepping on dry leaves, snapping twigs. Not crashing anymore, but still heavy, too heavy for a normal person to be moving that quietly in the woods. And there were multiple sets of them. They were surrounding me. My mind raced. Who was this? What did they want? Was it kids? Delinquents? Some kind of weirdo hillbillies? In the middle of nowhere? It didn't make any sense. And the whispers, the axe sound, it was all too strange, too coordinated. Panic started to rise. I needed to get out of there now. Forget the fire, forget setting up the tent. Just get back to the trail, back to the car, back to civilization. Then I remembered the gun. My 9mm. I'd almost forgotten about it in all the adrenaline and fear. I reached into my backpack, my hands trembling, and fumbled for the side pocket where I kept it. I unzipped the pocket, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the pistol grip. It felt heavy and solid in my hand, a small comfort in this suddenly terrifying situation. "I have a gun!" I yelled, my voice shaking even more now. "I'm armed! Stay away from me!" I pulled the pistol out of the bag, checked the safety automatically, my thumb flicking it off. The click seemed deafening in the sudden silence that had fallen around me. The circling footsteps had stopped again. Everything was still, listening, watching. I felt exposed, vulnerable, standing there in the clearing with my gun pointed out into the trees, not even knowing where to aim, what to aim at. Then I saw it. To my left, deeper in the trees, maybe 30 feet away. A large, thick tree. It started to shake. Not swaying in the wind shake. This was violent, unnatural shaking. Like something huge, something incredibly powerful, was grabbing onto the trunk and thrashing it back and forth. The whole tree was trembling, leaves rustling, branches whipping around like it was in a hurricane, even though there wasn't a breath of wind in the clearing. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't make any sense. Trees don't just shake like that on their own, unless something was shaking it. But what could be strong enough to do that to a tree that size? A sharp, high-pitched whistle cut through the air. It came from the direction of the shaking tree, a piercing, almost painful sound that resonated in my ears and vibrated in my bones. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not animal, not bird, not human. Something else, something primal. Terror, pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. This wasn't people messing with me. This wasn't some weird prank. This was something else entirely, something wrong, something unnatural. Reason vanished, logic evaporated. All that was left was raw, instinctual fear. My survival instinct screamed at me, "Run!" I didn't think, I just reacted. I shoved the pistol back into the side pocket of my backpack, not even bothering to put the safety back on. I grabbed the straps of my pack, slung it over my shoulders, and started to run. I ran blindly, scrambling back along the trail I'd come in on. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I didn't care about anything except getting away from that place, from whatever was in those woods. Behind me, I could hear crashing, thrashing. Something was following me, keeping pace, moving along the ridge above the trail. The tree shaker was coming after me. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching, branches whipping my face, roots tripping me up on the muddy trail. Every sound behind me made my heart leap into my throat. The snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the heavy thudding footsteps that seemed impossibly fast and powerful. I stumbled and almost fell, catching myself on a tree, panting, gasping for breath. I risked a quick glance back over my shoulder. The crashing sound stopped, just like before when I had yelled, when the rock was thrown. It was like whatever was chasing me was reacting to my movements, stopping when I stopped, waiting, watching. My fear was so intense it was paralyzing, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. I had to get out of the woods. I started running again, pushing myself harder this time, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The trail wound downwards, leading towards a small ravine. As I ran, I noticed something else, a smell, a strong, acrid, pungent smell that filled the air, like sulfur. like rotten eggs, but sharper, more intense. It burned my nostrils and made my eyes water. Where was that coming from? I reached the ravine, the trail dipping down into a shallow gully, then climbing back up the other side. As I went down into the dip, the sulphurous smell got stronger, almost overwhelming. And then I saw it. On the other side of the ravine, in a small clearing between the trees, it was standing. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, maybe 8, 9 feet, maybe even taller. It was massive, greyish, shadowy, blending into the dim light of the woods, but undeniably there. Bipedal, standing upright, it looked muscular, powerful. It was turning its head, slowly, deliberately, turning towards me. I saw a glimpse of a face, or what I thought was a face, broad, flat, with dark sockets where eyes should be, and a heavy brow ridge, hairy, covered in thick, matted fur. Bigfoot. My mind screamed the word even before I could fully process what I was seeing. Bigfoot. It was real. It was actually real, and it was huge, graceful, in a terrifying, immense way. It moved with a fluid power that was both mesmerizing and utterly horrifying. Then it was gone. In a blink. It turned its head. I saw its face. And then it stepped back behind the trees, vanishing into the dense undergrowth like it had never been there at all. The silence rushed back in, even more profound than before. The sulphurous smell lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. But I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. The glimpse of that creature, the sheer scale of it, the chilling alienness of its face, it had burned itself into my brain. If those whispers meant there was more than one of them, I couldn't even begin to think about it. I scrambled up the other side of the ravine, my legs pumping, my lungs screaming. I ran like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I knew it probably did. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the trees and back onto the gravel road where I'd parked my car. I fumbled with my keys, unlocking the car, throwing my pack into the back seat, and practically diving into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I peeled out of the parking spot, tires spitting gravel, and didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back on the highway, heading home, away from those woods, away from that thing. I haven't been back to Wayne National Forest since. I probably never will go back. People tell stories, you hear things, you read stuff online, you think it's all just made up, campfire tales, internet garbage. But I saw it. I felt it. I smelled it. Whatever it was out there, it's real. And it's something I'll never ever forget. And honestly, something I still can't explain. It just happened. And I got out. That's all that matters. To see further, through the scope, the world zoomed in. Trees, grass, sunlight filtering through leaves, and then movement, way out there, maybe 50, maybe 100 yards away. I focused the scope, adjusted the focus, heart hammering in my chest. And there it was, the creature, standing at the edge of another patch of woods, further into the property, just watching us. It was definitely the same one, same size, same brown hair, same disturbing human-like face. Just standing there still, looking right at us. And it wasn't just looking, it was intelligent. That's the only word for it. Its gaze was sharp, aware, like it was actually studying us, thinking about us. Not just a dumb animal staring out of instinct. This was something else, a primal fear, something deep and cold and ancient, just slammed into me. It wasn't like being scared in a haunted house or nervous before a test. This was terror, pure, unadulterated terror that went right down to my bones. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I was frozen, just staring back at this thing. For what felt like forever, but was probably only half an hour, we just stood there, us 3 boys paralyzed with fear, and that creature standing in the distance, watching us. Silent standoff, just the wind rustling the leaves and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Then Slowly, deliberately, it turned. Not running, not panicking, just turned and melted back into the woods, stepped behind a tree, and then it was gone, vanished again, like smoke. That's when the fear finally broke through. The paralysis lifted, and all we could do was run. Full sprint, back towards the farmhouse. Didn't stop until we burst through the back door, breathless, pale, stammering. We tried to tell the other guys what we'd seen, but it came out all jumbled, panicked. They could see we were genuinely terrified, though. They'd never seen us like that before. We must have looked like we'd seen a ghost. And in a way, maybe we had. Later, near the pond, I went to get a drink. Stupidly, I went alone. I was still jumpy, still freaked out, and just for a split second, as I was dipping my canteen in the water, I saw it again, or something. A fleeting shape, dark and fast, disappearing over a hill in the distance. Just a glimpse, but it was enough to send me running back to the house again, heart hammering all over again. I didn't say anything about that second sighting to the other guys, though. I was too freaked out and didn't want to make everyone more scared. Sunday morning was supposed to be our last day, packing up and heading home. But before we left, we did something else stupid. We decided to explore a different part of the woods, over on the other side of the property, away from where we'd seen the creature. We thought maybe it would be normal over there, like the farm hadn't been completely taken over by whatever weirdness we'd encountered. We were so wrong. We walked for maybe half an hour, deeper and deeper into the woods, pushing through underbrush. And then we came to it, a clearing, small, hidden clearing in the middle of the woods, and it was horrifying. Bones everywhere, littered all over the ground, bones of all sizes, big bones, small bones, bird bones, animal bones, and some bones that looked wrong, gnawed, broken, scattered, like some kind of charnel ground. The smell hit us first, even before we really saw what was there, a sickening, sweetish smell of decay. Then we actually saw it, the sheer volume of bones. It was disgusting. It was terrifying. It was something out of a nightmare. That's when the weekend just completely fell apart. Whatever shred of fun, whatever memory of war games we were supposed to have, gone. Just gone. Replaced by this overwhelming sense of dread and disgust. We didn't even talk to each other. We just turned around and walked back to the farmhouse in silence, each of us lost in our own horrified thoughts. Back at the house, we finally told Grandma and Grandpa everything, about the black figures, the creature, the bones. They listened, faces grim. Grandma, she actually went pale. Grandpa, he just rubbed his chin and stared out the window for a long time. Grandma finally spoke, voice shaky. She said there had been stories years ago about a black panther, people seeing it around these parts. Never proven, always rumors. And Grandpa mentioned some ranches down the road. They'd been talking about strange things, weird sounds, livestock acting spooked, things disappearing. Never put it all together, though, just wrote it off as coyotes or something. But after what we told them, and especially after hearing about the bones, they looked at each other, and I saw this fear in their eyes. A fear I'd never seen before. We left that Sunday afternoon, the minivan quiet, no more shouting or laughing. Just 6 pale, silent boys staring out the windows as we drove away from Grandma's farm, leaving it all behind. I haven't been back to that farm since. It's been, 20 years now, and I still think about it, all the time. The black figures, the creature with the human face, the bones in the clearing. I can still see it all, clear as day. I've tried to make sense of it over the years, tried to find explanations, wild animals, tricks of the light, teenage imaginations running wild. But none of it really fits. None of it explains the sheer wrongness of it all, the cold, creeping terror we all felt, the intelligence in that creature's eyes, the bones. God, the bones. I don't know what we saw out there on Grandma's farm that weekend, and honestly, I don't think I ever want to know. Some things are better left unexplained, just left alone. To this day, when I think about those woods in Wheeler County, I still get chills. And a feeling like something is still out there, watching, waiting, and I can't shake it, I just can't. Story 3. We'd decided last minute to take a drive out to this spot Sarah had heard about, Broken Mirror Campsite. It's supposed to be abandoned for years, something about a fire a long time ago. We didn't plan to camp there, just wanted to check it out. We're both into spooky places, urban exploring, that sort of thing. During the day, it was pretty much what you'd expect. Overgrown, a bit creepy vibe, but nothing too dramatic. We hiked around for a couple of hours, had some lunch, and decided to head back before it got too late. Leaving was when things started feeling different. The sun was going down fast, and that golden light was disappearing behind the trees, making everything long and shadowy. We took Madeira's Sombrias road out, that winding road that cuts right through the thickest part of the forest. It's called Darkwoods Road for a reason, I guess. We were just talking about our hike, listening to some music. Nothing loud, just something mellow playing low on the truck speakers. When it happened, we were driving through this really dense section of woods. The trees were packed in tight on both sides of the road, branches meeting overhead, and it felt like we were driving through a tunnel of darkness, even with the headlights on full beam. Then, just to my right, in the trees, I saw it. A shape, something big and dark, moving. It was just a flicker at first, right at the edge of the headlight beam, so I thought maybe it was just a deer or something. We get deer up there all the time. But this was different. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what I'd seen. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks, my eyes getting tired after a long day. But it was so solid looking, even in that split second. A few seconds later, Sarah spoke. Her voice was a bit quieter than usual, kind of hesitant. "Ben," she said, did you see something back there?" My stomach dropped a little. The fact that she'd seen it too, that made it real somehow. It wasn't just my imagination. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, but I could feel my pulse starting to quicken. "I did. What did you see?" She paused for a moment, like she was still trying to make sense of it herself. "It was dark," she said finally. "Really dark, like darker than the trees, and big, really big." My description of what I'd seen came tumbling out then, in a rush of words. "Yeah, exactly. Like a shadow, but not flat, solid. I don't know. It was moving between the trees, to the right, just after that little bend in the road." "Yes!" she almost shouted, relief flooding her voice that she wasn't going crazy. "Just there. I saw it too. It was huge. How big do you think?" "I don't know exactly," I said, trying to picture it again in my head. "Taller than me for sure, maybe 6.5, 7 feet, and wide, not just tall and thin, but broad, like thick." "Yeah," Sarah agreed, nodding, her eyes wide in the dim light from the dashboard. "Thick is the right word, like massive, and it was moving so smoothly, no noise, just gliding between the trees." That's what had struck me too, how silent it was. Deer crash around in the undergrowth. Even a bear would make some noise, snapping twigs, rustling leaves. But this thing? Nothing. Just this massive dark shape flowing through the trees like smoke. "Did you see any features?" Sarah asked. "Like limbs or a head or anything?" I thought hard, trying to recall every detail of that fleeting glimpse. "No," I said slowly. "No, I didn't. It was just formless in a way, like a solid block of darkness. It was hard to make out details with the trees and shadows, but no, I don't think it had any real shape, just big and dark." Sarah shivered, even though it wasn't actually that cold in the truck. "Me neither," she whispered. "It was just this huge black thing, moving." We drove in silence for a few minutes after that, both of us staring straight ahead, the music forgotten. The feeling in the truck had shifted. It was like the air had gotten thicker, heavier. The silence of the woods outside seemed to press in on us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Curiosity and a weird kind of dread were eating at me. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, you wanna go back? Just for a second? Just to see if we can see anything else?" Sarah looked at me like I was crazy for a second. "Go back? Are you serious? Back into those woods, in the dark?" "Just for a minute," I said. "We can just reverse back a little bit, shine the headlights, see if anything's still there. Maybe it was just a shadow, or our imaginations, you know?" I didn't believe it, not really, but I had to say something. I needed to have some kind of explanation, even if it was a bad one. She was quiet for a long moment, chewing her lip. I could see she was scared. I was too. But that feeling of unease, that itch of curiosity, it was stronger than the fear, at least for me. And I could tell, deep down, it was for her too. "Okay," she said finally, her voice still barely above a whisper. "Okay, but just for a minute. And if we don't see anything, we're going. Promise?" "Promise," I said, putting the truck in park and carefully shifting into reverse. I started backing up slowly, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig from the woods seemed deafening in the sudden quiet of the truck now that the music was off. My heart was pounding in my chest. I backed up for maybe 50-60 yards, until I thought we were roughly in the area where we'd seen it. I put the truck back in park and killed the engine. Silence. Absolute silence. Except for the frantic thumping of my own heart. I flicked the headlights back to full beam and angled the truck slightly to the right, trying to get the best possible view into the woods where we'd seen the thing. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a patch of trees maybe 100 feet deep. The trees were tall and thick, the ground underneath cluttered with fallen pine needles and undergrowth. Shadows danced and swayed with the slight breeze, playing tricks on my eyes. But there was nothing there, just trees, shadows, darkness. We sat there in silence, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, maybe less. 5 minutes of absolute frozen stillness, both of us staring out into the woods, straining our eyes, listening with every fiber of our being. The air was thick with anticipation, and something else too. A coldness that wasn't just the night air. It was a deep, unsettling coldness that seemed to seep into your bones. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I felt like we were being watched. Not just watched, but studied. Like something out there was looking back at us, assessing us, and we were completely exposed, vulnerable, sitting ducks in the beam of our own headlights. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tight, her knuckles white. I could feel her trembling slightly. "Ben," she whispered, her voice strained. "I don't like this. I really don't like this." I didn't like it either. My initial curiosity had evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Whatever we had seen back there, whatever was maybe still out there in the darkness, it wasn't natural. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It was something else entirely, and it felt wrong, dangerously wrong. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding hoarse even to my own ears. "Okay, you're right. Let's go." I didn't need any more convincing. I reached for the ignition, my hand shaking slightly. I turned the key, the engine sputtered to life, the sudden noise shattering the oppressive silence. I slammed the truck into drive, pulled back onto the road and put my foot down, not looking back. We didn't say a word as we drove, both of us staring straight ahead, barely breathing. The image of that dark shape burned into our minds. We didn't stop driving until we were well out of the woods, back on the main highway, with streetlights and other cars, and the sounds of civilization all around us. Only then, when we were finally truly away from Madeira's Sombreous Road and Broken Mirror campsite, and whatever we had seen in the trees, did we finally let out a breath. Even now, weeks later, I still can't shake it. I keep seeing it in my head, that massive dark form gliding silently between the trees. I've tried to rationalize it, come up with explanations, shadows, tricks of the light, tired eyes, but deep down, I know what we saw was real, and I know it wasn't anything natural. Sometimes, late at night when it's really quiet, I catch myself looking out the window into the darkness, wondering if it's still out there, wondering what it was, wondering if it saw us too. And the worst part is, I know we'll never really know. We just caught a glimpse, a fleeting moment in the dark woods of something we weren't supposed to see. And that feeling of the unknown, of the unexplainable lurking just beyond the edge of our headlights, that's what really chills me to the bone. I haven't been back to Juniper County since, and I don't know if I ever will be. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some shadows are better left in the dark. Story 4. Honestly, I still get chills thinking about it, even now, months later. We went camping up in Coconino County, Whisper Pines area. We've camped in Arizona a million times, especially to get away from the Phoenix heat in the summer. We're not rookies. We know the woods. We know animal sounds, all that stuff. We usually stick to established campgrounds, but this time we wanted something more remote, really get away from people. So Whisper Pines seemed perfect. Heard it was beautiful, really dense forest compared to a lot of Arizona, which sounded amazing. We found this spot off a Forest Service road, tucked back in pretty deep. Perfect, we thought. Tall pines everywhere, super thick woods all around the campsite. Felt like we were totally alone, swallowed up by trees. Saturday started off normal enough. We got the van set up, did some hiking, just enjoyed being out there. Then the afternoon hit and it started to rain. Not just a sprinkle, a real steady, soaking rain. We holed up in the van. David was napping in the back, and I was in the front passenger seat, just reading, looking out at the rain. It was actually kind of cozy, the sound of the rain on the roof of the van, the woods all hushed and damp. Then I heard it. At first I wasn't sure what it was. It was like a ripping sound, like really tough fabric tearing, but wood. It was coming from the woods, deeper in, but not that far, maybe 20-30 yards away. I strained to hear over the rain. Then I heard it again. Rip, creak, rip. It was definitely wood, and it sounded like something big was doing it. My first thought went to an elk. We've seen elk in the area before, and they're massive. Maybe one was rubbing its antlers on a tree or something. I got a little excited, actually. I love wildlife photography. I carefully reached for my camera bag, trying not to wake David. Got my camera out, put on the zoom lens, and quietly opened the van door, just a crack, to listen better. The rain had slowed to more of a drizzle now, which helped. I could hear movement in the underbrush, rustling leaves, twigs snapping. Definitely something big, moving through the thick woods. I raised my camera, pointed it towards the sound, trying to peer through the trees. It was so dense, I couldn't see anything. Just layers and layers of pine needles, branches, and rain-soaked leaves. I waited, camera ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Minutes passed. The rustling had stopped. Everything was silent again, except for the dripping rain. I started to think maybe whatever it was had moved on, deeper into the woods. Disappointed, I started to lower my camera, thinking about going back to my book. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, something exploded out of the trees. Not like an animal running, not like anything natural. It was like pure, violent force. A thick branch, thicker than my arm, came hurtling through the air, out of the dense trees and bushes, and slammed right into the side mirror of the van. The sound was unbelievable. A deafening crack like a gunshot, followed by the shattering of glass and the crunch of metal. The whole van rocked from the impact. I screamed. A real involuntary scream of pure terror. I jumped back, stumbled back inside the van, heart hammering in my chest. David bolted upright in the back, totally disoriented. "What the hell?" he yelled, his eyes wide with shock. I was shaking, adrenaline flooding me. Something hit the van," I stammered, pointing to the side mirror. We both stared at it, at the mangled metal, the shattered glass spiderwebbing across what was left of the mirror. It was bent inwards at a crazy angle, and there was a deep dent in the van door right next to it. This wasn't just some falling branch. This was attack. Deliberate, brutal attack. We scrambled out of the van, fear pumping through us. The rain had stopped completely now. The woods were silent, eerily silent after the chaos that just erupted. We cautiously moved around the van, our eyes scanning the trees. We were expecting to see, I don't know what, a bear, a huge angry elk, a falling tree somehow launched sideways, anything that could explain that kind of damage and violence. But there was nothing, just trees, silent, unmoving trees. The woods were thick and dark, swallowing up any details. We walked out a bit further, peering into the underbrush where the branch had come from. We couldn't see anything. No broken branches, no disturbed ground, nothing to indicate what had launched that thing. It was like it had come from nowhere. "What was that?" David asked, his voice hushed, almost a whisper. He's usually the calm one, the rational one, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I heard ripping sounds before, like something tearing wood. Then that." I gestured at the van mirror, still shaking my head in disbelief. We spent the rest of the afternoon in this weird state of unease. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a falling branch, somehow propelled sideways by something. Maybe a freak wind gust. But there was no wind. And the force, the directness of the hit, it felt intentional, like something had aimed for the van. We checked the damage more closely. The mirror was completely wrecked, obviously. The dent in the door was pretty bad, more than just a branch falling. We couldn't fix the mirror, not out here. David said we could still drive. The mirror wasn't essential, but it was unsettling. Really unsettling. It put a huge damper on the rest of the day. We didn't hike anymore. We stayed close to the van, constantly looking around, listening. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call made us jump. We made dinner, ate inside the van, doors locked. It felt stupid, locking the doors against trees, but we just felt exposed and vulnerable. As dusk settled, the woods got darker, and the silence became heavier, more oppressive. That feeling of being alone, that we'd sought out, now felt wrong, like we weren't alone at all, but were being watched, and not in a good way. We went to bed early. David fell asleep pretty quickly. He's always been a good sleeper. But I couldn't relax. I kept replaying the branch attack in my head, the violent sound, the force of it, and the silence afterwards. That was the worst part. It felt like something was still out there in the woods, watching us, waiting. I must have drifted off eventually, exhaustion finally overcoming my anxiety. I don't know how long I was asleep, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of hours, because I woke up suddenly, jolted awake by a sound. Not a loud sound, not a crash, not a scream, a low sound, a rhythmic sound, breathing, deep, heavy breathing, right outside the van. My heart instantly leaped into my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body clenched tight. I held my breath, straining to listen. Yes, definitely breathing. Heavy, labored breaths like something huge, something with massive lungs, was right outside the van. It was coming from the sliding window next to my feet, at the back of the van where we sleep. I was lying on my side, facing away from the window towards David. My eyes snapped open, wide in the dark. I could see the faint outline of David beside me, still sound asleep. I wanted to wake him, to shake him, to scream, but I couldn't move. Terror had paralyzed me. The breathing continued, slow and deep, but with a rasping quality, a sibilant undertone like air being forced through damaged airways. Sa, sa. It was right there, inches from the window, from my feet. And then I smelled it. A thick, musky animal smell, but wrong. Off. Like rotting meat mixed with something else, something acrid. It was overpowering, even through the closed window and the van walls. It filled the small space of the back of the van, suffocating me. That smell, combined with the breathing, it was terrifying. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't an elk. This was something else. Something big, something powerful, and something predatory. The breathing shifted. It became shallower, faster, like it was sniffing at the window, sniffing at me. I could feel its presence right there, just on the other side of the thin glass, sensing us, smelling us. My blood ran cold. I was trapped, completely helpless, with this thing outside. Then the sounds changed again. The breathing morphed into grunts, low, guttural grunts, rumbling and vibrating, deep in the chest. Animalistic, but more. There was something else in those grunts, something intelligent, like it was communicating something, but in a language I didn't understand, couldn't understand, and didn't want to understand. The grunts went on for what felt like forever, each one vibrating through the van floor, through my body, each one driving nails of ice deeper into my fear. I was rigid, every muscle screaming with tension, my breath held so tight my lungs ached. I couldn't even blink. I just lay there, petrified, listening to these horrific sounds and feeling the presence of this unknown creature just outside the window. I tried to will myself to move, to reach out and shake David, to make noise, anything to break this nightmare. But I was locked in place, paralyzed by sheer primal terror. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, to find a logical explanation. Bear, mountain lion, but the sounds, the smell, it didn't fit. It was bigger, darker, more wrong than anything I could imagine. After what felt like an eternity, minutes, hours, time seemed to distort, to stretch and bend in the darkness. The grunting finally stopped. The breathing slowed again, became heavy and deliberate, and then it started to move away. I could hear heavy footsteps crunching on the pine needles and dirt outside, moving away from the van, deeper into the woods. The breathing faded, the smell slowly dissipated. And then silence. Just the deep, absolute silence of the forest at night. I lay there unmoving for a long time, listening to the silence, waiting for something else to happen. My heart was still pounding, my body trembling, but the immediate terror had eased, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I finally dared to breathe again, shallow, shaky breaths. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head, just enough to see David. He was still asleep, completely oblivious to everything that had just happened. Part of me was furious at him for sleeping through it all, for leaving me alone to face that terror, but another part of me was grateful he hadn't woken up, hadn't been exposed to whatever was out there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed awake, listening, watching the faint pre-dawn light creep into the van, every sense on high alert. I didn't move, barely breathed, until the first real light of morning started to filter through the trees. When it was finally light enough to see properly, I carefully, so carefully, reached over and shook David awake. He groaned, rolled over, looking confused and sleepy. "What's up?" he mumbled. "Something was outside last night," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Something big, right outside the van." He blinked, his eyes widening as he registered the fear in my voice. He sat up quickly. "What? What do you mean?" I told him, in hushed, shaking tones about the breathing, the smell, the grunts. He listened, his face growing pale. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, staring at me, then at the sliding window. Let's check outside," he said finally, his voice low and serious. We unlocked the doors and got out of the van, slowly, cautiously, like we were stepping into enemy territory. The morning was beautiful, sunny, birds were chirping. The forest looked peaceful and serene in the early light. It was hard to believe the horror of the night before had actually happened here, in this idyllic setting. But then we saw it. Our picnic area, which we'd set up a little ways from the van under some trees, was disturbed. Not overturned or scattered like a bear would do. It was precise, almost surgical. Our cooler was still there, closed, untouched. Our food box was there too, also closed. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then we noticed things were missing. A package of cookies, still in its sealed plastic wrapper, was gone from the top of the food box. And a sealed plastic container of pre-sliced sausage, also from the food box, was missing too. We rummaged through the box. Everything else was there. Cans of beans, pasta, granola bars, fruit, everything else, untouched. Just the cookies and the sausage, specifically those two items, and then we saw the wrappers, torn open, neatly, almost carefully, not ripped to shreds like an animal would, just opened enough to get the food out. The empty cookie wrapper and sausage container were lying on the ground a short distance away from the picnic table. It was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't random scavenging. It was deliberate, targeted, almost ordered. Like something, had come to our campsite last night while that thing was sniffing at our window and had selectively chosen those two specific items and nothing else, ignoring everything else around them. Everything else that would have been easier to grab, bulkier, more food. We packed up and left Whisper Pines that morning. We didn't say much on the drive home. We were both just shaken. We didn't report it to anyone. What would we say? Something invisible attacked our van and then stole cookies and sausage but left everything else. It sounds insane. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened out there. Was it an animal? What kind of animal? And what kind of animal throws branches with that kind of force and precision, and breathes like that, and smells like that, and steals cookies and sausage and nothing else? I've tried to rationalize it, to find logical explanations, but there aren't any. And the memory of that breathing, those grunts, that smell, still haunts me. We went into the woods looking for peace and quiet, and we found something else entirely, something terrifying, something inexplicable, something that I still can't put into words, something that was out there, in the dark, watching us, hunting us, right outside our van window in the Whisper Pines, and we have no idea what it was or why it chose us. And that's the part that truly chills me to the bone, even now, just not knowing. Story 5. I still can't explain it. Even years later, trying to put it into words for someone else, it just sounds crazy. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And Jojo, my mare, she felt it too. It was spring of '97, and I was out riding in the Fire Reel National Forest over in Alabama. I knew that land like the back of my hand. Been riding horses since I was knee-high, training them practically my whole life. Jojo, she was a good horse, steady, smart. We were a team. Usually I stick to the marked trails, keeps things simple. But that day, I had this itch to go back to this old path I used to ride when I was younger, before they closed it off. No real reason, just nostalgia, I guess. It was a weekday, nobody around. Figured I'd take a little detour. This path was overgrown, hadn't been maintained in years. Bushes scratching at my legs, branches reaching out to snag my hat. But it was peaceful, quiet in a way that only deep woods can be. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. We were going down this ravine, pretty steep drop, following the old trail as it wound down towards a creek at the bottom. The trees were thick here, sunlight barely making it through the canopy. It got darker and cooler as we descended. The air felt heavy, damp. Then Jojo just stopped, dead stop, planted all 4 feet like she'd hit a brick wall. That wasn't like her. Jojo was sure-footed, nothing usually spooked her. I figured maybe she'd stepped on a rock wrong, or seen a deer maybe, though deer never usually bothered her this much. I leaned forward, soothing her, talking to her softly, running my hand down her neck. Easy, girl, easy. What is it? But she was trembling, Her nostrils flared, eyes wide, rolling white. She was staring, locked on something, not to the side, not behind us, but straight ahead. I followed her gaze. Just trees, more trees. The creek bed down below, rocky, with big boulders scattered around. Then I saw it. At first it was just movement. Something shifted high up in this massive oak tree right across the creek. It was bigger than any oak I'd ever seen, branches thick as my torso, reaching up like gnarled fingers. And in those branches, something was moving. I squinted, trying to make it out. Shadows played tricks in the deep woods. Maybe it was a bear climbing up the tree. Though bears around here are usually black bears, and they're not really climbers like that. Still, maybe a big one. Then it moved again, and the branches rustled louder, and I got a clearer look. It wasn't a bear. It was hairy, really hairy, like nothing I'd ever seen. It was hunched over a thick branch, almost blending in with the bark at first glance. But as it shifted, the morning light caught it just right. And I saw it. It was big, massive, like if you took Chewbacca and pumped him full of steroids. That's the closest I can describe it. Just huge, with thick matted hair covering it head to toe. Dark, almost black, but with streaks of rust color, or maybe mud. I don't know. It was hard to tell in the shadows of the tree. It was hunched, yes, but even hunched like that, it looked taller than me, easily, and thick, muscles rippling under that fur, even from this distance. Its arms, or what looked like arms, were long, too long, almost dragging down past the branch it was sitting on. And then I saw its face, or what I think was its face. It was obscured by hair, mostly, but there was a gap, a dark patch where its eyes were, and they were fixed on us, on Jojo and me. It wasn't looking at us like a deer looks at you, or even a bear. This was different. There was something calculating in its gaze, like it was studying us, curious, but not in a good way, in a way that sent ice straight down my spine. Sinister curiosity, that's the best way to describe it. For a moment, everything just froze. Me, Jojo, and that thing in the tree, just staring at each other across the ravine. The only sound was the creek trickling over the rocks and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then it shifted again. Just a small movement, but it was enough. It straightened up a little, and for a second it was almost fully exposed, silhouetted against the sky through the leaves. I got the full picture of its size then. It was enormous, way bigger than any man I'd ever seen, way bigger than any animal I should have been seeing in these woods, and it was watching us, intently, waiting. That's when the terror really hit me. It wasn't just fear, it was primal, bone-deep terror. Something inside me screamed that we were in danger, serious danger, and that we needed to get out of there, right now. I didn't think, didn't reason, just reacted. I yanked Jojo's reins hard, digging my heels into her sides. "Go! Giddy up! Go, go, go!" I yelled, voice cracking. Jojo needed no urging. The moment I spurred her, she was already spinning around, bolting back the way we'd come. Uphill, through the thick brush, she didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She was terrified too. I could feel it in every muscle of her body. We were scrambling back up the ravine, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, heart hammering in my chest like a drum gone wild. At first, I didn't see anything, just the trees, the brush, the shadows racing past. I thought maybe we'd gotten away with it. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe it wasn't interested in us. Maybe it would just stay in its tree and watch us go. Then I heard it. A sound. A roar. But not like any roar I'd ever heard before. Deeper, louder, more guttural. It was like a bear roar mixed with something else. Something human, or not human, but intelligent. Like a scream of rage, of frustration. And it was loud, deafeningly loud, echoing through the ravine, and it was coming from behind us, from the direction of the big oak tree. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just watching us anymore, it was coming after us. Jojo was already running full out, her hooves pounding against the uneven ground, branches snapping underfoot. I leaned low over her neck, urging her on, praying she wouldn't stumble, wouldn't fall. If she fell, I didn't want to think about what would happen if she fell. The roaring came again, closer this time, and I heard something else too. Crashing, heavy crashing through the undergrowth. Whatever it wasn't just roaring, it was moving. And it was moving fast, unbelievably fast for something that big. It was chasing us. Through the trees, up the ravine, the roar echoing behind us, the crashing getting closer. I could feel its presence. It felt heavy, oppressive, like a weight pressing down on us, driving us forward. Panic welled up in my throat, choking me. My breath came in ragged gasps, lungs burning. I could feel sweat running down my back, even though the air was still cool in the woods. We were still going uphill, struggling through the thick underbrush. Jojo was giving it everything she had, but I could hear the monster gaining on us. The crashing was closer now, so close it sounded like it was right on our heels. I knew we couldn't outrun it for long, not on this rough terrain. Jojo was fast, but whatever that thing was, it was faster and stronger, and it wanted to catch us. Desperation clawed at me. I had to do something, anything. Reaching under my jacket, my fingers fumbled for the revolver I always carried when I rode in the woods. A .38 Special, old but reliable. Never thought I'd actually have to use it, not for anything more than maybe a snake or a rabid dog. But this was different. This was monstrous. I pulled out the revolver, thumbed back the hammer. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. Looking back, over my shoulder through the trees, I saw it. Just a glimpse, a fleeting shadow moving between the trees, but it was enough. Big, dark, hairy, moving with incredible speed and power. It was keeping pace with Jojo, even through the dense woods. It was like something out of a nightmare. Taking aim was impossible. We were moving too fast. The trees were too thick. My hands were shaking too much. But I didn't have a choice. I had to try something. I pointed the revolver roughly in the direction I'd last seen it, behind us, and started firing, blindly, desperately, just pulling the trigger as fast as I could. Bang, 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 bang. The shots echoed through the trees, the recoil jarring my arm. I emptied the cylinder, all 6 shots fired into the woods behind us, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, one of them would hit something. Anything, to slow it down, to stop it. For a moment after the last shot there was silence. Just the sound of Jojo's hooves, my own ragged breathing. I held my breath, listening, straining my ears. Then I heard it again. The crashing, still coming, but something was different. It sounded slower, less certain, and the roaring, it was gone. Had I hit it? Had I actually managed to hit that thing with a lucky shot? I didn't know, but it sounded like maybe I'd slowed it down, just a little, maybe enough. We broke out of the thickest part of the ravine, the ground leveling out a bit as we reached the top. The trees were still thick, but the underbrush was a little thinner here. We were heading towards the main trail now, the one that would lead back to the horse camp. I kept pushing Jojo, urging her to keep going, even though she was breathing hard, lathered in sweat. I didn't dare slow down, not even for a second. I kept looking back, scanning the trees behind us, expecting to see it emerge at any moment. But it didn't. The crashing had faded. The silence of the woods returned, broken only by our own frantic sounds. We reached the main trail, finally, and I didn't hesitate, just turned Jojo onto it and kept going. The trail was wider, easier to ride on, and we picked up speed. Every muscle in my body was screaming, my lungs were on fire, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until we were safe. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, before we finally burst out of the trees and into the clearing where I'd set up my horse camp. The empty horse trailer was there, just like I'd left it. My truck parked beside it. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened. Except I knew something had happened, something terrible, something I couldn't even begin to understand. I didn't slow down until we were right next to the trailer. Then I slid off Jojo's back, legs shaky, almost collapsing. Jojo was trembling, still breathing hard, her sides heaving. She was spooked, really spooked, more than I'd ever seen her. I fumbled with the trailer door, got it open, and practically shoved Jojo inside. She went in willingly, relieved to be off her feet. I slammed the door shut, latched it, and then just stood there for a moment, leaning against the trailer, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The silence of the camp was deafening, but it wasn't the same peaceful silence as before. Now it felt charged, heavy, threatening. I could still feel that presence, even though I couldn't see anything. Then I heard it again, faintly from the edge of the woods, a rustling in the leaves, a snap of a twig, too heavy for a deer, too deliberate. It was still out there, still in the woods, watching us, even after everything, after the chase, after the gunshots. It hadn't given up. Terror surged through me again, even stronger this time. It wasn't over. It wasn't going to be over. Not here. I didn't even think about packing up camp, about gathering my gear, didn't think about anything except getting out of there, right now. I scrambled into my truck, fumbling with the keys, fingers still shaking too much to get them in the ignition. Finally, I got it started, engine roaring to life. I slammed it into gear, tires spitting gravel as I pulled away, trailer bouncing behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove. Faster than I should have, down the forest road, back towards the highway, away from those woods, away from that thing. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the Fire Real National Forest. Didn't stop until I was back in civilization, back in the bright lights, back where there were other people, other sounds, back where it felt safe, or safer at least. I've never been back to Fire Real since then. Never ridden those trails again. Never even talked about it to anyone, not really. Who would believe me? It sounds insane, even to my own ears, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. That terror, it's still with me. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it, a rustling in the leaves, a snap of a twig, and I remember those eyes, that massive hairy shape in the trees, and I know deep down that it's still out there, somewhere in the woods, watching, waiting, and I pray I never see it again. Story 6. Elias was dead asleep beside me, snoring like a chainsaw. Normally, our little dogs, Prissy and Duke, bless their cotton socks, they were pretty lazy things, mostly yapping at squirrels in the daytime and snuggling up by the fire at night. But this barking was different. It wasn't playful or territorial, it was pure panic. I sat straight up in bed, heart hammering already. The house was old, you know. You hear every creak and groan in the wood, especially at night. But this wasn't the house settling. This was wrong. I nudged Elias harder this time. "Elias," I whispered, shaking him. "Elias, wake up, the dogs." He grumbled and rolled over, pulling the covers up over his head. Typical. "They're probably just after a raccoon, Marty. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. The barking was getting louder, more desperate. I threw on my robe, the thin flannel feeling useless against the sudden chill that had seeped into the room. I went to the window and peeked out. The moon cast these long, eerie shadows from the trees, made everything look bigger and more menacing. I couldn't see anything from the bedroom window. It faced the side yard. But the barking was definitely coming from the front, from the road. Swallowing hard, I padded down the hallway, trying not to make any noise, even though the dogs were making enough for everyone. I went to the front door, the old wooden one with the glass panels on either side. Peeking through the side panel, I could finally see them. Prissy and Duke out in the yard, running back and forth near the edge of the driveway, going absolutely ballistic. Their little bodies were tense, fur practically standing on end. They were facing the road, barking their heads off at something out of sight. Then I saw them, other dogs, coming up the road. Not our dogs, not any dogs I recognized. They were bigger, some of them, lean and shadowy in the moonlight. A whole pack of them, trotting up the road towards our house. They were barking too, a deeper, coarser sound than Prissy and Duke's frantic yelps. It was a pack bark, you know, that hungry, aggressive sound that just sets your teeth on edge. My stomach clenched. We didn't usually get stray dogs out here, not like that. Bankhead Forest was right there, of course, but usually the wildlife kept to itself. And these weren't like stray mutts you see wandering around town. These felt different, more wild. As the pack got closer, I saw it. In the middle of the road, behind the dogs, something big and dark was moving. It was upright, walking on two legs. At first, my mind just couldn't process it. It was like my eyes were playing tricks on me in the moonlight and shadows. But it was there, no mistake. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, and dark. So dark it almost seemed to swallow the moonlight. It was moving slowly, deliberately, coming down the road right behind the pack of dogs. They were keeping their distance from it, the dogs were. Barking and snarling, but keeping a good 10, maybe 15 feet away. It was like they were herding it, but they were terrified too. I could hear it in their barks, that edge of fear. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was like a person, but not. Way too tall, for one thing. And the way it moved, it was slow, like it wasn't in a hurry. But there was a power in each stride. It wasn't swaying or stumbling like a drunk. It was deliberate, purposeful. As it got closer to the house, I could make out a little more detail, even in the dim light. It was massive, broader in the shoulders than any man I'd ever seen. And was it hairy? It looked like fur, thick and dark, all over it. I couldn't see a face, not really, just a dark shape at the top of this hulking body. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a person, not any person I knew. Fear, cold and sharp, stabbed through me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. It kept coming, slow and steady, right towards our house. The pack of dogs was still yapping and snarling around it, a frenzied escort. When it reached the edge of our property, near that thick patch of woods by the side of the road, it stopped. Just stopped, like it had reached its destination. The dogs circled it, still barking, but now there was a different quality to their barks, something even more urgent, more terrified. And then it did something that made my blood run ice cold. It crouched. Just suddenly, it bent down low to the ground, almost like an animal about to pounce. My mind screamed, "Get away from the window, Marty, get away!" But I was frozen, rooted to the spot, staring. It stayed crouched for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. Then, in one explosive movement, it stood up again, but not just stood. It launched itself upwards, straightening with incredible speed and power. And as it rose, it turned to face the dogs and let out a sound that I will never, ever forget. It wasn't a growl, not a bark, not a howl like any animal I'd ever heard. It was a scream, a deep, guttural, ripping sound, like something tearing its way out of the earth or out of a nightmare. It was ear-splitting, bone-chilling, and filled with pure, raw rage and terror. I think maybe it was terror too, coming from it, and as it screamed, it threw its arms out to the sides. Long, impossibly long arms that stretched out like tree branches, ending in... I couldn't make out hands, not in the dark, but they looked big too, huge. I gasped, a strangled sound that escaped my lips despite myself, and in that instant something shifted. The creature, it turned, fast, faster than something that big should have been able to move. It turned its head, or where its head should have been, and I felt it looking right at me. Through the glass, through the dark, I felt those eyes, whatever they were, focused on me. Then, just as suddenly as it had turned, it turned away again. It spun back around and vanished into the woods, just like that. 1 second it was there, a towering nightmare in the moonlight, screaming at the dogs. The next, it was gone, swallowed by the shadows of Bankhead Forest. The pack of dogs scattered instantly. They bolted, tails between their legs, running back down the road the way they came, disappearing into the distance, their barking fading away. Prissy and Duke, bless them, were still in the yard, whimpering now, but at least they'd stopped barking. They trotted back to the porch, shaking all over, and huddled by the door. I stood there, glued to the spot, staring at the dark woods where it had vanished. My body was trembling, not just from cold, but from something deep inside me, a primal terror I'd never felt before. I felt sick to my stomach, dizzy, like I might faint. Finally, slowly, like moving through water, I backed away from the door. I stumbled back to the bedroom, heart still hammering. Elias was still asleep, oblivious. I wanted to wake him, shake him, tell him what I'd seen, but what would I even say? Honey, I don't know what I just saw, but it was huge and dark and screaming, and I think it was looking at me. He'd think I was crazy or having a nightmare. I crawled back into bed, shivering under the covers, pulling them up to my chin. Sleep was impossible. I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence now that the dogs were quiet, listening to the house creak around me, and just waited for morning to come. Morning did come, of course. The sun rose, birds started chirping, everything looked normal again. Daylight is a powerful thing. It pushes back the night terrors. By the time Elias finally got up, yawning and stretching like nothing had happened, I almost convinced myself that maybe I had dreamed it. Almost. But then we went outside to let the dogs in. And that's when we saw the chicken coop. We kept a few chickens, mostly for eggs, in a little coop we'd built out back. It was nothing fancy, but sturdy enough to keep predators out, we thought. We were wrong. The coop was demolished. Not just broken into, but like something had ripped into it. The wire mesh was torn apart, wooden planks splintered, the door ripped off its hinges and thrown halfway across the yard. Feathers were scattered everywhere, little white chicken feathers blowing in the morning breeze like snowflakes. And inside, it was a massacre. All our chickens, every single one, was dead. Not just killed, but mangled, torn apart. Like whatever had done this had just been furious. There was blood everywhere and bits of... Well, I don't want to go into details. It was horrible, truly horrifying. Elias stood there, staring at the wreckage, his face pale. What could have done this? He whispered. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The image of that dark, towering figure from the night before flashed into my mind. The scream, the outstretched arms, the raw, primal rage. It made a terrible, sickening kind of sense. We buried the chickens, what was left of them. It was a grim, silent job. Neither of us spoke much. Elias kept shaking his head, muttering about raccoons or maybe a bear, though a bear in our yard was unheard of. He said it must have been a pack of wild dogs, gone crazy. He wanted to believe it was something normal, something explainable. Later that day, it got worse. We had a couple of quail, too, kept in cages near the barn. Elias went out to feed them in the afternoon and came back looking even more shaken. Marty, he said, his voice low and tight. The quail, they're gone. Gone. Just vanished. Cages were empty, doors still latched, no sign of forced entry, just empty, like they'd been taken, lifted right out of their cages. That evening, dusk came earlier than usual. The sky turned that bruised purple color, and a heavy stillness settled over everything. I found myself watching the woods, every shadow, every rustle of leaves making me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That cold dread from the night before was back, stronger than ever. It was just before full dark, when the light was fading fast and the shadows were getting long and distorted, that I saw it again. I was standing on the porch, looking out towards the woods, just watching, foolishly hoping, I guess, that it had all been a nightmare. And then I saw movement. At the edge of the trees, maybe 100 yards away, just at the tree line, something dark was standing there watching me. It was him, or it, the creature from the night before. I recognized the shape, the size, the darkness. It was standing there still as a statue, just looking at our house, looking at me. I could feel its gaze, even from that distance, like a physical weight pressing down on me. I froze again, paralyzed by fear. It was massive, even from far away, huge and dark and solid. There was no mistaking it this time, no shadows playing tricks. It was real. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then, without warning, it moved, but not towards the house. It turned and it ran, but not like a deer or a dog runs. It was an awkward, leaping kind of run, like it was too big, too heavy to move gracefully. But it was fast, surprisingly fast. It bounded away into the woods, disappearing into the deepening darkness. This time I screamed, a real scream, loud and piercing, the kind that comes from deep down in your gut. Elias came running out of the house, his face a mask of alarm. "Marty, what is it? What's wrong?" I just pointed towards the woods, trembling so hard I could barely stand. It was there again, out there, watching us. Elias squinted, peering into the shadows. "I don't see anything, Marty. Are you sure?" "I saw it, Elias. I saw it. It's the thing from last night, the thing with the dogs." He tried to calm me down, told me I was imagining things, that I was still upset about the chickens. But I knew what I'd seen. Twice now. It wasn't my imagination. That night, we didn't sleep. We locked all the doors, bolted the windows. Elias got his shotgun out, loaded it, and sat in the living room, watching the doors, listening to every sound. I sat with him, wrapped in a blanket, my nerves stretched wire-tight. The night was long and tense. Every rustle outside sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to move. We jumped at every creak of the house. And then it started. First, it was rocks, small stones thrown against the side of the house. Not hard, just taps. Like someone was testing the walls, seeing if they were solid. Tap, 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 all around the house. We turned off all the lights, held our breath, listening. The tapping went on for a while, then stopped. We stayed still, waiting, thinking maybe it was over. Then the banging started. Not on the house this time, but on the barn. A loud, booming thud, like someone was hitting it with a sledgehammer. Bang! The whole barn seemed to shake. Bang, bang, louder and louder. It went on for a while, this relentless banging, echoing through the quiet night. We could hear the wood groaning, straining under the force of the blows. Elias gripped his shotgun tighter, his knuckles white. Finally, the banging stopped. Silence again. A heavy, oppressive silence. We stayed huddled in the dark living room, listening, waiting. The storm started around midnight. Thunder rumbled in the distance, then closer, closer. Rain began to fall, softly at first, then harder, pelting against the windows, drumming on the roof. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house, rattling the windows in their frames. And in the middle of the storm, we heard it again. The scream. But this time it was different. It wasn't just a scream, it was a howl. Longer, drawn out, full of pain and rage and something else. Despair, maybe. It was hard to tell. But it was awful. Truly awful. It echoed through the storm, drowning out the thunder, chilling us to the bone. It was closer this time, too. Definitely closer. We huddled together, shaking, listening to the storm rage outside and the creature howl in the darkness. It felt like the world was ending, like we were trapped in a nightmare and there was no waking up. Morning finally came, grey and stormy and exhausted. We went outside cautiously, checking everything. The chicken coop was still a wreck, the quail cages still empty, and the side of the barn facing the woods, it was damaged. badly. The wooden planks were bowed inwards, cracked and splintered, like something huge and heavy had leaned against it, pressed against it with immense force. The whole side of the barn looked like it was about to collapse, and then we saw them. In the mud near the barn, where the storm had softened the ground, there were tracks, huge tracks, footprints, but not like any human footprints I'd ever seen, too big, too long, and wrong somehow. 3 toes forward and 1 back, almost like a bird's foot, but gigantic, and beside them handprints, or paw prints, big, heavy prints in the mud, clearly not human, but almost. We followed the tracks for a little ways into the edge of the woods. Then we stopped. We couldn't go any further. The fear was too thick, too real. We went back to the house, locked the doors again, and we stayed inside. For days, we were afraid to go out, afraid to go to sleep, afraid of the dark. The screams and howls kept coming at night, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always there, haunting the darkness, filling our nights with terror. We'd hear rocks thrown, branches breaking in the woods, sometimes even thumps against the house itself, like it was circling, testing us, waiting. It went on like that for weeks, living in fear, under siege. Our peaceful country life turned into a living nightmare. We barely slept, barely ate. We were constantly on edge, waiting for something. We didn't know what. We just knew it was out there, in the woods, watching us, screaming in the night. And then it stopped. Just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The screams, the howls, the banging, the rocks, all gone. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a different kind of silence, a waiting silence, a silence that felt even more terrifying than the noise had been. We've stayed here. We haven't left Rabbit Town, but things aren't the same. I still jump at every shadow, every strange sound. I still look at the woods and feel a cold dread creep into my heart. Elias tries to be brave, but I see it in his eyes too. He's scared. We both are. We never saw it again. We never found out what it was. Some folks around here whisper stories about things in the forest, things that shouldn't be there, things that come out at night, but nobody talks about it out loud, not really. It's like some things are better left unspoken, but I know what I saw, I know what we heard, and I know deep down that whatever it was, it's still out there, somewhere in the woods, watching, waiting, and sometimes, on a quiet night, when the moon is full and the wind is just right, I think I can still hear it. A faint, distant howl, carried on the breeze from the depths of Bankhead Forest, and I shiver and lock the doors and pray that it stays away. Because I know without a doubt that whatever was out there in October of 2013, it wasn't gone for good. It was just quiet. For now. Story 7. The sun was blazing that day. July, like 89 or something, sticky hot even up in the Rockies. Dad, he was a geologist, always chasing rocks, called himself an adventure miner, which mostly meant he dragged us kids along on his wild goose chases through the mountains. This time, it was supposed to be a family hike. Yeah, right, turned into anything but. So it was me, my cousin Mark, Dad and Aunt Susan up near, well, doesn't really matter where in the Rockies. Somewhere pretty remote, you know, where the trees are thick and it feels like you're the only ones around for miles. Dad wanted to check out some old claim or something, muttered about rare earth elements and potential for a big strike. Typical Dad speak. He dropped Aunt Susan and Mark off at this split in the trail, said he'd only be gone an hour, tops. Mark, he was always jumpy, said he didn't like the feel of the place, kept looking over his shoulder. Aunt Susan, she just wanted to read her book, didn't pay him any mind. Me? I was just bored. We waited there by the trailhead, kicking at rocks, swatting flies. It was maybe 40 minutes later, and Mark started acting really weird. He kept saying he could hear things, whispering, just low like wind through trees, but not the wind, more like voices. Aunt Susan, of course, said he was being dramatic. I strained my ears, but honestly, all I heard was the usual mountain sounds. Birds chirping, the rustle of leaves, that high-altitude hum sometimes you get in your ears. But Mark, he was getting seriously freaked out. He went pale, started clutching Aunt Susan's arm, said the whispers were getting louder, closer. Even Aunt Susan started looking around a bit nervous then, though she still tried to play it cool. Dad showed back up not long after that, dusty and grinning, holding a chunk of rock that probably looked just like any other rock to anyone else but him. Mark, he immediately started telling Dad about the whispers, voice shaking. Dad, being Dad, just laughed it off. "Mountain air playing tricks on you, kiddo," he said, clapping Mark on the shoulder. "Probably just marmots chattering or something." He was always rationalizing everything. We started hiking again, Dad leading the way, still yakking about his rock. Mark kept looking back, jumpy as ever. We hiked further up, the trail getting narrower and steeper. Dad stopped at another side trail, barely even visible, overgrown and barely used. He said he needed to mark it, something about a different route back, exploration, whatever. He pulled out some flagging tape, told us to wait again, said he wouldn't be long. Honestly, we were used to this. It was just Dad being Dad. He went off into the trees, and we waited. This time the quiet felt different, heavier somehow. The sun was still bright, but the shade from the pines was deep and cold. Even the birds seemed quieter. Mark was silent now, just staring into the woods where Dad had disappeared. Aunt Susan was actually looking around properly, her book forgotten in her lap. I felt a little prickle on the back of my neck, a weird unease I couldn't explain. Then, it happened. Dad came bursting back through the trees, not walking, running, and his face. I'd never seen him look like that, pure terror. His eyes were wide, wild, and he was breathing like he'd just run a marathon. He didn't say anything, just grabbed Aunt Susan's arm and mine, yanking us up the trail. "Move! Just move!" he gasped, pushing us forward. We didn't ask questions. We just ran. Mark, pale as a ghost already, was struggling to keep up. We scrambled up the trail, tripping over roots and loose rocks, Dad shoving us along. I risked a look back down the side trail where he'd come from, and what I saw, it made my blood run cold. It looked like a bomb had gone off. The trail Dad had just walked was gone. Not just overgrown, but destroyed. Trees snapped in half like twigs, giant roots ripped out of the ground, dirt and rocks flung everywhere, and this stuff. All over everything, green, slimy, and glistening in the sunlight. It looked like someone had taken a giant vat of slime and just thrown it all over the forest floor. The smell hit me then too, sickly sweet and rotten, like something dead but also chemical? It made my stomach churn. What was that?" Aunt Susan wheezed, finally slowing down a bit, her face white. Mark was practically hyperventilating. Dad just shook his head, eyes darting back towards the ruined trail. "No time," he croaked. "Just keep moving. Higher ground." We kept climbing, the trail getting steeper and rockier. The air felt thinner, colder now, even with the sun. Every shadow seemed darker, every rustle of leaves sounded amplified, menacing. We were all panting, hearts pounding, but Dad wouldn't let us stop. He kept glancing back, like he expected something to come crashing through the trees after us. Then we heard it, a sound from higher up the mountain. Not a whisper this time, more like a deep, echoing grunt. It vibrated in the air, making your teeth ache. It wasn't animal, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was too low, too resonant, too wrong. Dad froze. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring up the slope. He whispered, voice strained, "Did you hear that?" Aunt Susan and Mark just nodded, eyes wide with terror. I felt a shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. And then Dad did something stupid, really, really stupid. he yelled, right up at the mountainside, towards where the grunt had come from. "Hello? Is anyone up there? Hello?" Why he did that, I'll never understand. Maybe shock, maybe some crazy geologist instinct to investigate the unknown. But whatever it was a mistake. A massive, terrifying mistake. The ground seemed to rumble, not like an earthquake, but like something enormous was moving. And then the trees above us started to shake violently. Dirt and pebbles rained down. And then a roar, not a grunt anymore. A full-throated, earth-shattering roar that ripped through the mountain air. It was deafening, primal, filled with rage. And then it started. The avalanche. But not snow, vegetation, tons of it. Trees, bushes, rocks, dirt, all cascading down the slope towards us, like the mountain itself was vomiting up its guts. The roar grew louder, closer. We could see it now, a churning wave of green and brown, crashing down through the trees. Dad screamed, "Run! Downhill! Now!" We turned and scrambled back down the trail, the roar behind us growing deafening. The ground was shaking, trees cracking and snapping as the vegetation avalanche ripped through the forest. I risked another glance back, and that's when I saw it. In the middle of the churning mess of vegetation, a shape, dark, massive, rolling down the hillside with terrifying speed. At first I thought it was a bear, a huge bear caught in the avalanche, but then as it got closer I saw it wasn't a bear. It was something else, something wrong. It was huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, all black fur and muscle, but the way it moved, it wasn't like a bear rolling downhill. It was controlled. Like it was riding the avalanche, guiding it, using it. And then, impossibly, it stood up. Right there in the middle of the cascading debris, it rose up on two legs. Bipedal. Like a man. But a monstrous, impossibly huge man covered in black fur. It stood upright, towering above the crashing vegetation, and it was looking right at us. Fear hit me like a physical blow. My legs turned to jelly, my lungs burned, but I kept running. I stumbled, almost fell, but Dad grabbed my arm and hauled me forward. I could hear him fumbling in his pocket, pulling out his little .22 revolver. Stupidest gun in the world, but it was all he had. He turned, aimed, hands shaking so badly I thought the gun would fly out of his grip. He pulled the trigger. Click, nothing. He pulled again. Click, still nothing. Damn gun jammed. Of course it would. Everything was going wrong. I looked back again, stupidly, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The creature was still standing there, watching us. It wasn't moving, wasn't chasing, just watching. I got a better look at it then, even though it was still partly obscured by the dust and debris. Its face. It wasn't animal. It was almost human-like, but grotesquely distorted. Reddish-brown skin, stretched tight over heavy bones. A ridge of dark fur, a mane almost around its head and neck. And the eyes. God, those eyes. They were dark, deep-set, and they seemed to burn. They looked right through you, cold and intelligent and utterly alien. There was no animal ferocity in them, just a deep, ancient knowingness. It stared at us, and it was like it was judging us. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It turned, disappeared into the trees on the other side of the trail, swallowed by the forest. The vegetation avalanche slowed, petered out, leaving a swath of destruction in its wake. We didn't stop running until we reached the trailhead, back at the split where Dad had left us before. We collapsed there, gasping for breath, shaking, covered in dirt and leaves. Aunt Susan was crying, Mark was whimpering, and even Dad, tough, rational Dad, was trembling. He kept checking his jammed revolver, staring back up the trail like he expected the creature to reappear any second. We sat there for a long time, too stunned to speak. The sun was still shining, birds were chirping again, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Everything felt tainted. Dad finally started to talk. In a low, shaky voice, he tried to rationalize it. Bear attack, rock slide, Something natural, something explainable. But even he didn't believe it. We'd all seen it. We'd all felt it. The unnatural roar, the unnatural movement, the intelligence in those eyes. Later, after we'd finally made it back to the car, shaky and exhausted, Dad insisted on going back. He said he'd left his backpack, his tools, his samples back up there. Stupid, I know, but he's stubborn. He had to go back. Aunt Susan and Mark refused to go anywhere near that trail again. I went with him, mostly because I didn't want him going alone. We walked back up, slow and cautious this time, Dad with his useless revolver still clutched in his hand. The forest was eerily silent. The path of destruction from the vegetation avalanche was still stark and brutal, a raw scar across the mountainside. The green slime was still there, glistening on broken branches and crushed leaves, smelling even more sickeningly sweet up close. We got back to where he'd marked the side trail, and then we saw it. Another creature. Smaller than the first one, maybe half the size. It was rummaging around near where Dad's backpack must have fallen. It was making these low, guttural noises, sniffing the ground, its black fur matted with dirt and slime. Dad froze again. He whispered, "Stay back. Stay absolutely still." We watched it, hearts pounding. It was closer this time and smaller, but somehow even more disturbing. It moved with a jerky, unsettling gait, its limbs too long, its proportions wrong. It had the same reddish-brown face as the first one, the same dark, burning eyes. Then it picked something up, a rock. Not just any rock, but a boulder almost, round, grey, and about the size of a basketball. It lifted it with surprising ease, considering its size, and slammed it down on the ground right next to Dad's backpack. The sound echoed through the silent woods, a sharp, threatening crack. It picked up the rock again, and this time it turned towards us. It cocked its head, those dark eyes fixed on us, and it raised the rock, holding it over its head, a clear, unmistakable threat. That was it. That was the moment I knew. We weren't observers anymore. We weren't just hiking in the woods. We were prey. We were being hunted. Dad didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed my arm, turned, and we ran like we'd never run before. We didn't look back, didn't stop, didn't even breathe. We just ran. And behind us, we heard it, the heavy thud of something big crashing through the undergrowth, faster than anything that size should be able to move. And the rhythmic, sickening thump, thump, thump of something heavy being slammed against the ground. The rock. It was chasing us, and it was using that rock to drive us, to terrorize us, to keep us running. Every thump was a hammer blow to my fear, pushing us faster, deeper into panic. We ran for what felt like forever, branches whipping at our faces, lungs burning, legs screaming. And still, behind us, the relentless thump, thump, thump. It was in my head, in my bones, a drumbeat of pure terror. We burst out of the trees, finally stumbled onto the dirt road. We didn't stop until we were at the car, doors locked, engine roaring to life. Only then did we collapse, shaking, sobbing, and utterly broken. We never went back. Dad never got his samples, never got his backpack. He never talked about it again, not really. He'd get quiet sometimes, stare off into space, a haunted look in his eyes. I still see it in my nightmares. Those dark eyes, the crushing vegetation, the thump, thump, thump of the rock. To this day, I don't know what we saw up there in those mountains. I don't know what those creatures were. Monkeys? Apes? Something else? Something not even supposed to exist? All I know is that day in the Rockies changed me, changed us all. There's a wilderness out there, a darkness, that humans just aren't meant to stumble into. And sometimes, when you do, you don't just find rocks. You find something that finds you. And you're never quite the same again. I still go hiking sometimes, but never in the deep woods, and never alone. And always, always, I'm listening for whispers, and for the thump of a rock on the ground. Because out there in the wild places, something's watching, and it remembers you. Story 8. Okay, so this happened a few years ago now, but honestly it still messes with me. I haven't really talked about it much, except with Ethan, obviously, because he was there, you know, at the end of it anyway. But even with him, it's kinda unspoken. We just don't go near Blackwood anymore. It was supposed to be a normal day. Early spring, getting warm, the kind of day where you could feel summer just around the corner. Ethan's grandpa needed help fixing his garage roof. Some tiles had come loose after that last big storm. Seemed like an easy job. Me and Ethan, we were always up for helping out old Mr. Abernathy. Plus, he always had these amazing cookies his wife made. Mrs. Abernathy passed a few years back, but he still baked sometimes. Tried to keep her recipes going, I guess. They weren't quite the same, but still, you know, cookies. Anyway, I was running a bit late that morning. Ethan was already at his grandpa's house, waiting for me. I live on the other side of town from them. Usually I'd just take the main road, kind of a boring walk, but it's safe and easy. But I was thinking about those cookies, and I knew Mr. Abernathy wanted to get started on the roof before it got too hot. And honestly, I've always been a bit impatient. So I thought, why not take the shortcut through Blackwood? I know, even saying it now sounds stupid. Blackwood. Everyone in Oakhaven knows about Blackwood Forest. It's not even that big, really. You can see the edge of it from town, just a dark patch of woods on the outskirts. But there are stories. Always have been. Weird stuff, you know, old wives' tales mostly. About strange creatures, things moving in the shadows, people getting lost and never coming out the same. Nobody really believes them, not really. Not in this day and age, but still there's always been this feeling about Blackwood, like it's not quite right. My grandma used to tell me stories about it when I was a kid, trying to scare me out of going near it, I guess. Something about shadows that move on their own and sounds that aren't natural. Silly stuff, really. But it sticks with you, doesn't it? Even when you grow up, you still get a little shiver thinking about it. But that day, I was thinking about cookies and sunshine and just wanting to get to Ethan's grandpa's place fast. So I told myself it was just stories. Blackwood was just a forest, trees and leaves, nothing to be scared of. It would save me at least 15 minutes, maybe 20, and it was a nice day, I thought. How bad could it be? So I went for it. I walked down Willow Creek Road until I got to the trail that cuts into the woods. There's a little faded sign there, almost swallowed by the trees now. Used to say Blackwood Forest, no trespassing, but half the letters are gone and nobody pays attention to it anyway. People used to hike there years ago, but not anymore. Not really. As soon as I stepped off the road and onto the trail, it got darker. Like instantly darker. It wasn't even that late in the morning, maybe around 8:30, 9 o'clock. But the trees in Blackwood are so thick, and they grow so close together, the sunlight just doesn't get through. It's like walking into twilight, even in the middle of the day. The air changed too. It got colder and heavier and quiet. Super quiet. Like all the sounds from outside just got sucked away. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just nothing. That was the first thing that made me feel a little uneasy. It's never that quiet in the woods. Usually it's full of sounds, even if you don't always notice them. But Blackwood was just dead silent. I kept walking, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. It's just a forest, I told myself again. Just trees, nothing to worry about. The trail was narrow and winding, barely more than a deer path in places. It was overgrown, leaves and branches sticking out everywhere. I had to push my way through bushes and step over fallen logs. After maybe 10 minutes, I started to get a really weird feeling, like I was being watched. You know that feeling? When you know there's someone looking at you, even if you can't see them? It was like that, but amplified, like times 10. It wasn't just someone watching, it was something unseen. I stopped walking and turned around, looking back down the trail. Nothing, just trees and shadows and the overgrown path disappearing behind a bend. I listened, really listened, for any sound other than my own breathing. Still nothing. Just that heavy, oppressive silence. Okay, I thought, this is stupid. Just my nerves. It's the stories getting to me. I started walking again, faster this time. I tried to hum a tune to break the silence, but it felt wrong. Like the silence was listening. Like it didn't want to be broken. So I stopped humming. And then I heard it. Or didn't hear it. That was the freaky part. It was like a silence inside the silence. Like a tiny gap in the background noise, if that makes any sense. It was so subtle, I almost didn't notice it. But it was there. A break in the natural quiet of the woods. I stopped again, heart pounding in my chest, listened again, and then I heard it again. That little nothingness. It was like something was holding its breath, right behind me. I turned around again, faster this time, and again, nothing, just trees. But this time the feeling was stronger. It wasn't just being watched anymore, it was being followed. I started walking faster, almost jogging. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was never anything there. Just shadows moving in the breeze, branches swaying. But the feeling, it was getting worse and worse, like whatever was following me was getting closer. And then I stopped, just for a second, to catch my breath, to try and calm down. Big mistake. As soon as I stopped moving, the silence reacted. It was like it had been waiting for me to stop. This time, it wasn't a little gap in the silence. It was a mimic. It was like it copied my silence. As soon as I stopped moving, everything around me went completely still. Even the breeze seemed to die down. No leaves rustled, no branches moved. Just frozen stillness and silence, absolute and total. And in that silence I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence right behind me. So close I could almost feel it breathing on my neck. Cold breath. Icy. I didn't turn around this time. I knew somehow that if I turned around I would see nothing, but it would still be there, just behind me, waiting. And then I ran. I ran like I've never run before in my life, blindly, desperately, crashing through bushes, tripping over roots, ignoring the branches whipping my face. Just ran, away from whatever it was. As soon as I started running, it started moving too. I could hear it now. Not clearly, not a distinct sound, more like a rustling, leaves crunching underfoot, branches snapping, but too quiet, too controlled. Like it was trying not to be heard, but it wasn't really trying that hard. Like it knew it could catch me whenever it wanted. It kept pace with me perfectly. No matter how fast I ran, it was always right there, just behind me, matching my speed, matching my every move. It was playing with me. I could feel it, enjoying the chase, and then it started making sounds, low sounds, growls maybe, deep rumbling noises coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They weren't loud, but they vibrated through the ground, through my bones. They were wrong, unnatural, like something from a nightmare. The growls got louder, closer. The sounds of it moving got heavier, more forceful. It was breaking branches now, deliberately, crashing through the undergrowth, no longer bothering to be quiet. It was letting me know it was there, letting me know it was coming. I was gasping for breath, my lungs burning, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I knew if I stopped, it would be on me. Whatever it was, and I didn't want to know what it was. I just wanted to get out of the forest, out of Blackwood. I could see sunlight ahead now through the trees, a patch of brighter light, the edge of the woods, Ethan's grandpa's backyard. I pushed myself harder, summoning every last bit of strength I had left, stumbled, almost fell, but kept going. And then I burst out of the trees, into the sunshine, into the open, into Mr. Abernathy's yard, collapsing onto the grass, heart hammering, lungs screaming. Ethan was there, standing by the garage, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Caleb, what the hell?" I couldn't speak for a minute, just trying to breathe, trying to get air back into my lungs. Finally, I gasped out, "Shotgun! Grandpa's shotgun! Get it, Forrest!" Ethan looked confused, then worried. He ran into the house and came back a minute later, carrying Mr. Abernathy's old shotgun. It looked ancient, but it was real. "What is it, Caleb? What happened?" he asked, his voice tight. I pointed back towards the woods, towards the dark line of trees. Something in there, it chased me, followed me, all the way through. He looked at the woods, shotgun raised. "What was it? Did you see it?" I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "No, didn't see anything, but it was there. I felt it, heard it, growling." Ethan looked at me, his face pale now too. He could see I was serious. He could see the fear in my eyes. He knows me. He knows I don't freak out easily. "Stay here," he said, his voice low. He started to walk towards the edge of the woods, the shotgun held in front of him. "Ethan, no!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet. "Don't go back in there. It's dangerous. I don't know what it is, but it's bad." He stopped, hesitated. Then slowly, he backed away from the trees, coming back to where I was standing. He lowered the shotgun. "I don't hear anything," he said, his voice quiet. "But I believe you. You look like you've seen a ghost." We stood there for a long time, staring at the edge of the woods, listening. The sounds of the normal world slowly started to come back. Birds chirping again, the wind rustling in the leaves of the trees in the yard, Mr. Abernathy humming to himself inside the house. But from Blackwood, nothing. Silence again, but a different kind of silence this time. Not the heavy, oppressive silence from inside, but just emptiness. We never saw anything, never heard anything else that day. But I know what I felt. I know what chased me through those woods. It was real, something real and terrifying, something that hunts in silence, something that plays with its prey, something that, I don't know, something ancient, maybe, something that doesn't belong in this world. We told Mr. Abernathy we wouldn't be using the shortcut back, told him we were just going to stick to the road around. He didn't push it, didn't ask why, just nodded slowly, like he knew something, like he'd heard stories himself, maybe. I've never gone back into Blackwood since, neither has Ethan. We drive the long way around even now, even if it takes an extra half hour. It's not worth it, not ever worth it. Sometimes at night, I still hear those growls in my dreams, low, rumbling, unnatural, and I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, feeling that same icy breath on my neck, and I know, I just know, that whatever it was in Blackwood, it's still there, waiting, watching, and it knows where I am. I don't know what else to say. It happened, and I can't explain it. I just wanted to share it, finally, get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. I don't know. All I know is Blackwood Forest is not just trees. There's something else there, something wrong. And I hope to God I never have to go near it again. Ever. Story 9. Anyway, we had this old metal drum out back on the porch. Not like a regular trash can. This thing was huge. My grandpa had gotten it surplus from somewhere, I don't know, maybe the army. It was olive drab, that faded army green color, and taller than me, probably 4 feet high at least. We kept dry dog food in it, one of those massive bags of kibble because we had a couple of labs back then. Real big eaters. That drum was always heavy, like seriously heavy. You couldn't just tip it over or anything. You had to really shove it to even budge it an inch on the concrete porch. So it was late, maybe 10:30, something like that. I was inside, just chilling in the living room, probably watching some stupid late-night TV, and I started hearing this noise. At first, I didn't really pay attention to it, thought it was just the wind maybe, or branches scraping against the house. But then it got louder, and I realized it was coming from the back porch. It was this scraping, dragging sound, like metal on concrete. I kind of froze for a second, just listening. My mind started running through all the normal stuff it could be. Maybe one of the dogs had somehow gotten out, although that seemed impossible because they always slept inside at night. Maybe a raccoon or something, but raccoons don't sound like metal scraping on concrete. This was a heavy sound, a real weight to it. Then it hit me. It sounded exactly like that dog food drum moving. But that was impossible. There's no way that thing could just move by itself. It was way too heavy. And we never left the back porch door open at night, especially not in the summer with bugs and stuff. My heart started to speed up, you know that feeling? Like your chest is getting tight and your pulse is just hammering in your ears. I got up and walked real quiet to the kitchen, which was at the back of the house and had a window that looked out onto the porch. I peeked through the curtains, real careful, trying not to make any noise. It was darker out back there, even with the moon. The porch was covered, so it was always a little shadowy, even in daylight. I strained my eyes, trying to see past the edge of the roof, and then I heard it again, clearer this time. Scrap. Thump. Yeah, definitely metal, definitely heavy. I couldn't see the drum from the kitchen window because of the way the porch was laid out. It was around the corner from the door, but the sound was definitely coming from that area. I started to feel a real knot of unease in my stomach. This wasn't normal. I backed away from the window, still quiet, and went to the living room. My grandpa was in his recliner, reading, like he always did before bed. My grandma was probably already asleep. He looked up when I came in, kind of frowned over his glasses like I was bothering him. "Grandpa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it probably still came out a little shaky. "There's something out on the back porch. I think it's messing with the dog food drum." He lowered his book and gave me that skeptical look he used to give me when I was a kid, and told him some wild story. "Dog food drum? What are you talking about?" "I hear it," I said. "I swear. It sounds like it's being dragged around. The metal drum, Grandpa. You know how heavy that thing is." He sighed and put his book down on the table next to his chair. "Probably just a raccoon, Ethan. They get into everything, probably trying to tip it over for the food." "Grandpa, no," I said. "It's not a raccoon. It's too heavy for a raccoon. That thing weighs like 50 pounds full of food. A raccoon couldn't move that." I could feel my voice getting higher, a little panicky. I really did not like this feeling. He looked at me for a second, like he was actually considering what I was saying. He knew how heavy that drum was. He filled it himself, and he knew I wasn't usually the type to get freaked out by noises outside. He finally nodded, slowly. "All right," he said. "All right, let's go take a look, just to make sure." He stood up kind of stiffly. He wasn't a young man anymore, but he was still strong. He walked over to the coat rack by the front door and pulled down his old shotgun. It was a single-shot 16 gauge, old as dirt, probably older than him. He kept it loaded just in case, he always said. Mostly for varmints. Coyotes sometimes got too close to the house, or so he claimed. But he'd never actually used it, not in front of me anyway. He checked the action, the way he always did, even though he knew it was loaded. The click-clack of the gun loading echoed in the quiet house, and suddenly everything felt really serious. It wasn't just some raccoon anymore. My stomach twisted tighter. He handed me the shotgun. It was heavier than I expected, cold metal in my hands. "You take it," he said. "You go out front. Go around to the back porch. I'll come out the front door in a minute. Just be careful, Ethan, and for God's sake, don't point that thing at anything you don't want to shoot." His voice was low and serious now, no more dismissing it as a raccoon. My hands were shaking slightly as I took the gun. I'd shot it before, a few times with him when I was younger, target practice in the woods behind the house. But I'd never held it like this, not for real, not when I was actually expecting to maybe shoot something. I walked out the front door, slowly, gun held in both hands like I'd seen in movies. It felt clumsy and awkward. The night air was cool on my skin now. A little breeze had picked up. The moon was brighter out front, and the shadows from the trees in the yard stretched long and black across the grass. I started walking around the side of the house towards the back porch. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every little rustle of leaves, every cricket chirp, sounded way too loud in the silence. I kept expecting something to jump out at me from the shadows. As I got closer to the back corner of the house, I could hear the scraping again, clearer than ever. It was definitely the metal drum, and it was moving around a lot now, not just being dragged, but almost rattled, like something was trying to get into it. I rounded the corner of the house, slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible. The back porch was right there, just a few more steps. The door to the porch from inside the house was closed, I remembered that for sure, but the screen door leading out to the yard, that was hanging wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. And then I saw it. The moonlight was hitting the porch just right enough to see, but it was still mostly shadows. And in those shadows, next to the dog food drum, there was something. A dark shape. It was hunched over, kind of crouched down, right next to the drum. And the drum was moving, rattling around, and I could hear that scraping sound even louder now. My mind went blank for a second, just pure panic. I couldn't make out what it was in the shadows, just that dark shape, bigger than a raccoon, bigger than a dog, way bigger. And it was messing with that heavy metal drum like it was nothing. I raised the shotgun, my hands shaking even worse now. I tried to remember what Grandpa had told me about aiming, about the safety, about cocking it. My thumb fumbled for the hammer on the back of the gun, trying to pull it back, to get it ready to fire. I was so nervous, my fingers were clumsy, and I couldn't get a good grip, and then my thumb slipped, it just slipped off the hammer, and the gun went off. Boom! The sound exploded in the quiet night, deafeningly loud, right there in my hands. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and I almost dropped the gun. There was a flash of light, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air, thick and acrid. Everything happened so fast. In the split second after the gun went off, I saw the dark shape jerk back, like it had been hit or startled. And then it moved. It moved fast. It didn't run like an animal runs, not like a dog or a deer or anything normal. It was low to the ground, and it moved in a jerky, unnatural way, almost like it was crawling, but way too fast to be crawling. It just shot out of the shadows and across the yard, heading towards the woods at the back of the property. It was only in the moonlight for a second as it crossed the open grass, but I saw it clearly for that moment. It was dark, black almost, and low to the ground, and I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't furry like an animal, it looked smooth, like dark, smooth skin, and it was gone, swallowed up by the shadows of the trees before I could even blink. My ears were still ringing from the gunshot, and I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. I just stared at the spot where it had been, my heart still pounding out of my chest. The dog food drum was still there, tipped over now, lying on its side. Kibble was spilled all over the porch. Then the porch door opened behind me and Grandpa came out, looking wild-eyed and worried. "Ethan, what the hell was that? Are you all right? Did you shoot something?" I just stood there, still shaking, pointing the gun towards the woods where the thing had disappeared. I couldn't even speak for a second. I don't know, Grandpa. I finally managed to stammer out, my voice cracking. I don't know what it was. It was messing with the drum, and the gun went off. He took the shotgun from my hands, real careful, and looked around the porch. He saw the tipped-over drum, the spilled food, and then he saw the shotgun blast marks on the side of the house, right next to the porch door. The buckshot had torn into the siding and peppered the side of the garage, too. He walked over to where the drum was and looked around, sniffing the air like an animal himself. "Smells like dog food," he said, kind of dumbly. Then he looked at me again, his eyes narrowed. "What did you see, Ethan? What was it?" I tried to explain, tried to describe the dark shape, the way it moved, how it wasn't like any animal I knew. I told him it was low to the ground, smooth and impossibly fast. But it all sounded crazy, even to me as I was saying it. He listened, his face getting more and more serious. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I was done, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, looking out at the woods, the shotgun hanging loose in his hand. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet, almost like he was talking to himself. "Could have been a bear," he said. "Lost bear. Looking for food. They can be real sneaky." A bear. I wanted to believe him, I really did. It was a normal explanation, something I could understand. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears in the woods before, camping with him when I was a kid. This wasn't a bear. It moved too weird, too fast, and it didn't look right, even in that split-second glimpse. But I didn't argue with him. What was I going to say? That it was some kind of monster? Some creepy thing from the shadows? He wouldn't have believed me. He wanted it to be a bear, something normal, something he could understand and deal with. And honestly, so did I. We went back inside, quiet and shaken. Grandma was awake now, in a panic because of the gunshot. We told her it was nothing, just a raccoon getting into the dog food, and I'd accidentally fired the gun trying to scare it off. She fussed and worried, but she seemed to buy it. Grandpa helped me clean up the spilled dog food and right the drum. We locked up the porch door good and tight for the night. We never talked about it again, not really. We just moved on. Life went back to normal in Oak Haven. The summer ended, fall came, winter, and then spring again. The days got longer and the memory of that night started to fade, just like any bad dream. But sometimes, late at night, when it's really quiet and the moon is just right, I still think about it. I remember the sound of the metal scraping, the dark shape in the shadows, and the way it moved. And I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't a bear or a raccoon or anything normal at all. And I still have no idea what the hell it was. I just know that something was out there that night, something that wasn't supposed to be, and it scared the hell out of me. And honestly, even now, years later, thinking about it, it still does. I really wish I knew what it was, but I don't. And that's maybe the scariest part of it all, just not knowing. It just stopped being a sound and a shadow, and it became this hole in my memory, this question mark that never goes away. Story 10. It was a Saturday night, late fall. Sarah and I had been together for maybe 2 years at that point, and we were always up for doing something different, getting out of the city. We both loved nature and hiking, even though neither of us were exactly Bear Grylls material. This time, we decided to check out Tranquil Lake State Park. It's not too far from Oak Haven, the town closest to where I grew up, actually, a place I always kind of avoided because of the stories about Blackwood Forest. Yeah, that forest. Even just typing the name feels weird. Blackwood Forest has always had this reputation. Local legends, campfire stories, the whole shebang. People say it's cursed, haunted, whatever you want to call it. As kids, we used to dare each other to go near the edge of it, especially at night. But nobody ever went in, at least not that I knew of. It was just this dark, imposing place that everyone gave a wide berth to. Even in daylight, it always seemed darker and quieter than any other woods around. Anyway, Sarah, being Sarah, is all about exploring, doesn't really scare easily, and hadn't grown up with these Blackwood stories. She was actually fascinated by the whole thing, so naturally she wanted to check out Tranquil Lake State Park because it's right next to the edge of the forest. We drove out there after dinner. It was already pretty dark by the time we got to the park. No moon that night, sky completely black, which honestly added to the whole spooky vibe right from the start. We pulled into the parking lot near the marina. It was totally deserted. Not another car, not a single person, just us, the darkness, and the quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I remember saying something like, "Kind of eerie, huh?" And Sarah just laughed, saying I was being dramatic. We got out, grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. It was one of those cheap plastic ones, not super bright. but we figured it would be enough for a short walk. The plan was just to hike a little way into one of the trails, get a feel for the place, and then head back. We weren't planning on a major trek or anything. The trail entrance was right by the parking lot, disappearing straight into the trees. As soon as we stepped onto it, it got even darker. The trees were thick, blocking out whatever little light there was from the parking lot. The air felt different too, heavier, colder. It's hard to describe, but it just felt oppressive. We walked in, maybe 300-400 yards, not far at all, just chatting. Sarah pointing out stuff she saw in the beam of the flashlight. Weird-looking mushrooms, the shape of the trees, normal stuff. I was trying to relax, telling myself it was just woods, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling creeping up inside me, like something was off. And then it hit me, out of nowhere. I can't explain it rationally, but suddenly this wave of pure, unadulterated terror just washed over me. It wasn't like being startled or seeing something scary. It was this internal, visceral fear, like my body just decided it was in mortal danger, even though my brain couldn't pinpoint why. My heart started pounding in my chest, like it was trying to break free. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt dizzy, nauseous, and this splitting headache just slammed into me right behind my eyes. It was intense, almost debilitating. I literally had to stop walking and put my hand on my forehead because I felt like I was going to throw up or pass out. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. She could see something was seriously wrong with me. I tried to speak, but my voice was shaky. I don't know. I managed to get out. I feel really bad. Really, really bad. She put her hand on my arm, looking at me closely. "You look pale. What is it? Are you sick? Did you eat something weird?" "No, I'm fine. Well, I was fine. Just now, all of a sudden." I trailed off, trying to figure out how to explain something that made absolutely no sense. I just feel terrified. For no reason. Like something really, really bad is about to happen. Sarah frowned, her brow furrowed. "Terrified? What are you talking about? We're just in the woods, it's quiet, relax." She was trying to reassure me, but I could tell she was starting to get a little freaked out too, seeing how genuinely panicked I was. "No, Sarah, you don't understand," I said, my voice getting more urgent. "We need to go back, now. Something's wrong here, really wrong." I was practically pleading with her at this point. She looked around, into the darkness surrounding us. "I don't see anything, I don't feel anything. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe it's just your anxiety acting up?" "I do get anxiety sometimes, but this was different. This wasn't a mental thing. This was physical, overwhelming." "It's not anxiety, Sarah, I swear. It's this place. Something about this forest. I don't like it. I feel like we're in danger." She hesitated for a moment, still looking confused but seeing how distressed I was. Okay, fine," she said finally. "Let's go back. But seriously, Ethan, you're freaking me out a little bit now. What do you think is going to happen?" I didn't know what to tell her. I just had this overwhelming feeling of dread, like we had stumbled into something we shouldn't have, something ancient and malevolent. We turned around, and I started practically dragging her back the way we came. I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew there was nothing to see in the darkness, just trees, just shadows. But my senses were on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig making me jump. The headache was getting worse, pounding in rhythm with my racing heart. I just wanted to get out of those woods, back to the car, back to anywhere that felt safe. We finally burst out of the tree line, back into the parking lot. The relative openness and the dim light from the distant park entrance sign felt like a massive relief, even though it was still pitch black all around. We stumbled over to one of the picnic tables near the parking area and just sat down, breathing heavily. Sarah was looking at me with a mixture of worry and confusion. "Okay," she said. "Seriously, what was that? You were like a different person in there. You were terrified." I tried to catch my breath, my heart still hammering against my ribs. "I don't know," I said again, shaking my head. "I honestly don't know. It just came over me, this feeling, like something was hunting us." She wrapped her arms around me. "There was nothing hunting us, Ethan. It was just the woods. Maybe you're just not feeling well. Let's just go home, okay? We can get some rest. You'll feel better in the morning." "Maybe," I mumbled, still feeling shaky. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just being unwell. It was something about that place, about Blackwood Forest. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, talking about what had just happened. Sarah was still trying to rationalize it, suggesting maybe it was low blood sugar or a panic attack triggered by the darkness, anything to make it make sense. I wasn't arguing, just listening, trying to calm down, the throbbing headache slowly starting to subside. We were discussing whether we should just go back to her apartment or maybe grab some late-night diner food somewhere. And then we heard it. It started as a low rumble, almost like distant thunder, but deeper, heavier. At first, I thought maybe it was a truck engine starting up far away on the highway, even though there wasn't a highway close to the park. But then it got louder and louder, and it was clearly coming from the direction of the forest, from inside the forest. The rumble turned into a growl, a guttural, monstrous sound that vibrated through the ground beneath us, up through our bodies. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard before. It was inhuman and unbelievably loud. It built and built and built until it exploded into a full-blown roar. A roar that was so deafening, so primal, so utterly terrifying that it felt like it was ripping through the fabric of reality itself. Imagine the loudest sound you can possibly imagine. Now amplify it, then amplify it again and again. It was like that. It was louder than a jet engine taking off right next to you, louder than a bomb going off. It was a sound that was physically painful to your ears. But it wasn't just in your ears. You felt it in your chest, in your bones, in your teeth. I froze, paralyzed. Every cell in my body screamed danger. Sarah gasped, clutching my arm, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't laughing anymore. She wasn't rationalizing. She heard it too. She felt it too. The roar went on and on and on, seemingly endless, echoing through the darkness, bouncing off the trees. It was filled with rage, with fury, with something ancient and hungry. It wasn't just loud, it was evil. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. Evil. I later tried to explain it to people, how loud it was, and the closest comparison I could come up with was like, imagine 10 grizzly bears, all in a blind rage, all roaring at the same time, right next to your head. But even that doesn't even come close. This was something else entirely, something otherworldly. We were both frozen solid, staring in the direction of the forest, towards the dark tree line from where that ungodly sound was emanating. I think we both literally stopped breathing. We were just sitting there, petrified, like rabbits caught in headlights. The roar finally stopped, just as abruptly as it had started. Silence descended, but it was a heavy, oppressive silence, charged with the residue of that horrific sound. The quiet was almost as terrifying as the roar itself. It was like holding your breath after narrowly escaping drowning, waiting for the next wave to crash. My brain finally kicked back into gear, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand and yanking her up. We didn't think. We didn't plan. We just bolted. The closest cover we could see was a blue plastic porta potty standing a few yards away. Pathetic, I know, but in that moment it seemed like the safest place on earth. We scrambled behind it, crouching down, pressed against the plastic wall, our hearts hammering in unison. We peered around the edge of the porta potty, back towards the forest. Darkness, complete and utter darkness. We couldn't see anything, we couldn't hear anything, except our own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of our hearts. We stayed there, crouched behind that flimsy plastic box for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. Every rustle of leaves, every cricket chirp seemed magnified, a potential signal that whatever had made that roar was coming for us. After what felt like a lifetime, I very, very slowly peeked my head out from behind the porta potty again. Still nothing. Still just the dark woods, silent except for the normal night sounds, now sounding almost mocking after what we'd just heard. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Now. Just run to the car. Don't stop for anything." Sarah nodded, her face pale and streaked with tears. I hadn't even realized she'd been crying. We crept out from behind the porta potty, our bodies tense and ready to flee at the slightest sound. We ran to the car, fumbling with the keys, finally getting the doors unlocked. We practically threw ourselves inside, slamming the doors shut and locking them instantly. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I almost missed. The engine finally turned over, and I threw the car into reverse, backing out of the parking space way too fast, tires squealing on the gravel. We didn't say a word to each other until we were miles away from Tranquil Lake State Park, speeding down the highway, leaving Blackwood Forest and that terrible sound far behind us. The further we drove, the more the fear started to recede, replaced by a sort of numb shock and disbelief. We got back to Sarah's apartment in complete silence. We didn't even turn on the TV or the radio. We just sat on the couch, still trembling, still processing what we had just experienced. Later, much later, after I started trying to make sense of it all, I stumbled across some information online about infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves that are below the range of human hearing, but that can cause physical effects, nausea, anxiety, fear, headaches, that kind of stuff. Apparently, there are natural sources of infrasound, but also industrial and military applications. I started wondering if maybe that first wave of terror I felt, the headache, the nausea, maybe that was some kind of infrasound phenomenon. Something coming from the forest, maybe geological, maybe something else. And the roar, I tried to find explanations for that too. Animals? Some kind of weird atmospheric event? Some hoax? But nothing really fit. No known animal makes a sound like that. It wasn't like thunder or wind or anything natural I could think of, and it was way, way too loud to be a prank or anything human-made that I could imagine. To this day, I have no idea what we heard that night in Tranquil Lake State Park. All I know is that it was real. We both heard it. We both felt it. And it changed something in both of us. We never went back to Tranquil Lake State Park, never even drove close to Oakhaven again. And honestly, the thought of Blackwood Forest still sends a shiver down my spine. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with that roar echoing in my head. I try to forget it, to pretend it didn't happen, but I can't. Some things you just can't unhear, and some places are just wrong. And Blackwood Forest feels deeply, fundamentally wrong. And whatever made that sound that night, I don't ever want to know what it was. Some things are better left in the dark, in the silence, especially in the dark silence of a place like that. It just stopped, just like that. Story 11. It's funny how some days just stick with you, you know. Not the good ones necessarily, but the ones that feel wrong. Off. Like the world tilted for a minute and you caught a glimpse behind it, and what you saw wasn't right. That's how I think about that morning. April 2013. Sounds like any other day, right? Spring was just starting to nudge winter out of the way, and I was living my regular life in Oakhaven, working as a diesel mechanic. Oakhaven ain't exactly a metropolis. Small town. Everyone knows everyone's business, and most folks are connected by a web of family going back generations. My family, we've been around Oakhaven forever. Solid, working-class folks. Nothing fancy. I wrench on trucks for a living, mostly big rigs and farm equipment. It's honest work, pays the bills, and I'm good at it. Gotta be when people are relying on you to get their livelihoods back on the road. That morning, it was still dark out, pre-dawn dark. Like the kind of dark where you can barely see your hand in front of your face without a light. I got a call. Emergency job. Guy out on State Highway 314 said his semi had broken down, blocking part of the lane. Needed someone out there fast to get him moving again before the morning rush hour really kicked in. It was a Friday, and everyone's in a hurry to get their weekend started. I didn't even argue, just threw on my work clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed out. It's part of the job. You get calls at weird hours. First thing I did was swing by the Veloz station on the edge of town for coffee. Needed caffeine injection if I was going to be messing with busted engines before sunrise. Got a large black coffee, the kind that'll peel the paint off a truck, paid the sleepy cashier, and hopped back in my F-250. It's a good truck, lifted a bit, got some beefy tires. Makes me feel a little safer on these back roads, especially when the weather gets dicey. Highway 314, that road runs along the edge of the Blackwood Forest. Now, Blackwood Forest ain't just any woods. It's big, like really big, and it's old. Been around forever, seemingly. People around here have always had a kind of uneasy feeling about it. Stories, you know. Old wives' tales, mostly. Ghost stories, weird animal sightings, stuff like that. I never paid them much mind. Grew up hearing them, figured it was just small-town talk. Driving out on 314, it was quiet. No traffic yet at that hour. Just me, the rumble of my truck, and the darkness pushing in from both sides of the road. The Blackwood Forest side was especially dark. You couldn't see anything in there, just solid black, like the woods just swallowed up all the light. Kind of gives you the creeps if you let it. I usually just tune it out. I was cruising along, probably doing about 70 km/h, maybe a little more, just trying to get to this broken-down semi and get the guy back on the road. The road was mostly straight there, passing by that old Valley lumber depot. Place had been closed down for years. Just empty buildings and overgrown fields now. Open area, though, for a bit at least, before the forest closed back in on both sides of the highway. I was fiddling with the radio for a second, trying to find a decent station. Commercials were driving me nuts. Stupid thing to do, I know, taking my eyes off the road, even for a second, but it was just a quick glance down to twist the knob. That's all it took. When I looked back up, that's when it happened. Just there, right in front of me. For a split second, my mind couldn't even process what I was seeing. It was so out of place, so completely wrong, that my brain just kind of short-circuited. I remember thinking, what the hell? Like it was some kind of trick of the light. But it wasn't a trick of the light, it was real, a figure, massive, standing right on the edge of the road, just about to step onto the asphalt. It came out of the Blackwood Forest, from that wall of absolute blackness. Just materialized. It was tall, taller than my truck, and my F-250 is lifted. I mean, seriously, this thing was huge. I'd guess at least 8, maybe 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Hard to say exactly, it was so sudden and so dark, but it towered over my vehicle. Definitely taller than the roof. The color. I remember it being a sort of light brown, or maybe a tan. Not fur exactly, but something textured, rough-looking. Hard to make out details in the pre-dawn gloom, but it wasn't smooth like skin. It was coarser, like bark almost, but alive. That's the closest I can describe it. And the size, it wasn't just tall, it was broad. Massive shoulders, thick limbs. It wasn't like a skinny monster, all legs and arms. This was solid, heavy. It looked like it could rip my truck in half with its bare hands. It stepped onto the road, slowly, deliberately, like it owned the place, like the highway was just some little inconvenience in its path. It took maybe 3-4 steps across the lane, heading from the Blackwood Forest side towards the open fields on the other side of the road, near the old lumber depot. Each step was slow, powerful. You could feel the weight of it, even from inside my truck. I remember thinking, Jesus Christ, what is that thing? My first reaction, pure instinct, was to swerve, just yank the wheel and get the hell out of its way. Didn't even think, just reacted. I cranked the steering wheel hard to the left. My truck lurched, tires screaming, the whole frame shuddering. I felt the weight shift, that stomach-dropping feeling like it was going to roll. For a split second, I thought I was going to flip the damn thing right there on Highway 314. I fought the wheel, wrestled the truck back under control. My heart was hammering in my chest, adrenaline spiking like crazy. I slammed on the brakes, not even realizing how hard until the ABS started kicking in. Tires screeching on the asphalt. Dust and gravel spraying up from the shoulder of the road. I brought the truck to a stop, thankfully, without crashing or rolling it. My hands were clamped white-knuckle on the steering wheel, knuckles aching. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. For a second, everything was just ringing in my ears, the smell of hot brakes and burning rubber filling the cab. Then, silence. Dead silence, except for my own ragged breathing. I slowly, cautiously, looked back to where I'd seen it, the spot on the road where that thing had been standing. Gone. Just gone. Like it had vanished into thin air. The road was empty, dark, just the faint hint of pre-dawn light starting to bleed into the eastern sky. And the Blackwood Forest, a solid wall of blackness on my right. I stared at the road, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? Was I hallucinating from the lack of sleep and too much coffee? Had I drifted off for a second and dreamed the whole thing? No. It was real. I knew it in my gut. The way my body was still shaking, the adrenaline still coursing through me, the memory of that massive shape. It wasn't a dream. It was too vivid, too visceral. I could still see it, burned into my mind, the size, the color, the slow, deliberate steps. But where did it go? It had only taken maybe 10 seconds, 15 tops, from when I first saw it to when I slammed on the brakes. It had taken maybe 4 steps across the road. Then, gone. Back into the Blackwood Forest, into the fields. There was nowhere for something that big to just disappear that fast. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, heart still pounding, staring at the empty road, at the black wall of the forest, at the empty fields, trying to piece it together, trying to make it make sense, but it didn't. It couldn't. Eventually, the shivering started, not just from fear, but from the cold morning air. I realized I was soaked in sweat, even though it was chilly. I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself down, put the truck in drive and slowly, cautiously, pulled back onto the road. Drove the rest of the way to the broken-down semi in a daze. Did the job on autopilot. Fixed the engine, got the trucker back on the road. He was just grumpy about the delay, didn't notice anything was off with me. I mumbled something about needing more coffee and got out of there as fast as I could. All the way back to Oakhaven, my mind was racing, replaying the scene over and over again, trying to rationalize it. Trying to find some explanation, any explanation that made sense. Maybe it was a bear? Nah, no bear is that tall. And the shape, the way it moved, it wasn't like a bear. And bears don't usually come that close to the highway, especially not in this area. Besides, the color was wrong, too light. A deer? Come on, a deer doesn't tower over an F-250, and deer don't have that kind of mass. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks in the low light. Again, no, it was too solid, too real. I felt the fear, the sheer primal terror of something huge and unknown crossing my path. That fear wasn't imagined. Then something clicked in my memory, something I hadn't thought about in years. Stories from my childhood, stories about the Blackwood Forest, stories I'd always dismissed as just drunken ramblings from my Uncle Ray and my cousin Billy. Uncle Ray and Billy, they were characters, drank a lot, told tall tales. Nobody in the family really took them seriously, but they were always going on about the Blackwood Forest, spending time out there, hunting, camping, whatever, and they'd come back with stories, crazy stories, stories about things moving in the woods, things that weren't animals, things that were bigger, things that walked upright, things with red eyes, red eyes. I hadn't even thought about the eyes in my encounter. It was too dark, too fast. I couldn't swear I saw eyes. But now those stories started to creep into my mind. Stories of giant things in the Blackwood Forest, things that watched you from the trees, things that stalked the edges of the woods at night, things that were more than just animals, things that were something else. I remember Uncle Ray especially used to talk about the giants of Blackwood. He'd slur his words, smell of whiskey, and tell these wild stories about huge, hairy creatures he'd seen in the forest. Everyone just laughed it off. "Ray's been hitting the bottle again," they'd say. "Don't listen to him." And I didn't. Never did. Until now. Now, sitting there in my truck, parked in front of my garage, the image of that massive figure burned in my brain, the fear still raw in my gut. Uncle Ray's crazy stories didn't sound so crazy anymore. It felt like the shadow of the Blackwood Forest, that darkness I'd always felt but ignored, had finally reached out and touched me, had shown me something real, something terrifying, something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. I've tried to make sense of it ever since. I've looked up bear sightings in the area, checked for any reports of anything unusual. Nothing. Of course not. Who would believe it anyway? Yeah, I saw a 9-foot-tall light brown thing come out of the woods. They'd laughed me out of town, so I kept it to myself, tried to bury it, tried to forget it. But it's always there, in the back of my mind. Whenever I drive Highway 314, especially at night or early morning, I can't help but look at the edge of the Blackwood Forest. I see that wall of black trees, and I remember that figure stepping out of the darkness. I still don't know what it was. I can't explain it. All I know is what I saw. And what I saw that morning in April, it changed something in me. It shook the foundations of what I thought was real. It made me question everything I believed about the world. And the worst part is, I have this feeling, this deep, unsettling feeling, that it's still out there. Somewhere in the Blackwood Forest. Watching, waiting, and that one day, it might step out of the darkness again. Story 12. It started subtly, you know, like a background hum you almost get used to but can't quite ignore. Grew up in Silent Creek, Ashwood County. Woods were my backyard, Crow Mountain looming there in the distance, always watching. Saybrook area to be exact, and yeah, woods were paradise back then. Hunting with my dad, building forts, just being a kid. Never felt fear, just woods. But as I got older, things started shifting. Not like a switch flipped, more like a dimmer slowly turning down the light, replacing it with shadows. Started with sounds. Out hunting deep in the woods, miles from any road, you expect silence broken only by nature, right? Birds, squirrels rustling, maybe the wind. But then, these knocks, tree knocks. At first I thought it was woodpeckers, bigger ones maybe, but it was wrong. Wrong rhythm, wrong sound altogether, deeper, heavier, and almost intentional, like someone hitting a giant drum way off in the trees. Thump, 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 thump. Not random pecking, but a pattern, or what felt like a pattern. I'd stop, listen, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but it was like the woods themselves were breathing. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then silence again, just the normal woods noises, as if nothing happened. Then came the footsteps, always just out of sight, just at the edge of hearing. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, but too deliberate to be animals, too heavy for deer, wrong kind of rhythm for squirrels. It always sounded like someone walking, someone big, but trying to be quiet, failing a bit, moving through the underbrush, keeping pace with me somehow. No matter how fast I walked or which way I turned, it was still there, paralleling me. I'd stop dead still, holding my breath, listening, every muscle tense, and the sounds would stop too. Silence again, just the woods. Start walking again after a minute, maybe two. There it'd be again. Always behind, never quite catching up, but always there. Like I was being escorted, but by what and why? It messed with my head bad, made my skin crawl, made being alone in the woods, my sanctuary, start feeling wrong, unsafe. The worst part, the feeling, always felt like I was being watched. Every time I went into those woods, whether I heard the knocks or the footsteps or not, that feeling was there, constant, like a weight in my chest. Eyes on me. Even if I couldn't see anyone, even when I was sure I was alone, I could feel it. Like something out there was aware of me, studying me, maybe judging me. It's hard to explain the intensity of it. It wasn't just paranoia, it was something visceral, gut deep, telling me, screaming at me that I wasn't alone, not truly alone. Then that day at New Limo Lake, it was a crisp morning, sun barely up, mist rising off the water, perfect fishing weather. Went out on the lake in my small boat, hoping for some base. Middle of nowhere, that lake, surrounded by dense woods, part of the wildlife refuge. Peaceful, usually. That morning was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Just the gentle lapping of water against the boat, the creak of the oars, as I rowed towards the deeper part of the lake. Air was cold, bit into my lungs when I breathed deep. Felt good, in a way, until it didn't. I was casting, letting the lure sink, just enjoying the stillness, the solitude, trying to ignore that underlying hum of unease that had become my constant companion in the woods. Then it happened. Kablam! Sounded like a bomb went off right next to the boat. Water exploded upwards, a geyser erupting right beside me. Boat rocked violently. I nearly jumped out of my skin, heart leaping into my throat. Instinct kicked in, thought it was a huge fish, a massive muskie maybe, jumping, striking. Adrenaline surged. Grabbed my rod, ready to fight, reeling in fast, expecting to see line screaming off my reel. But there was nothing. Line was slack, water settling back down, ripples spreading out, just water and silence. Except for my heart pounding in my ears. What the hell was that? Stared at the water, expecting to see some monstrous fish surface, some lake leviathan. Nothing. Just the disturbed surface slowly calming down. Thought maybe it was a falling branch, but the sound, the force, it was too much, too focused. Then it happened again. Kablam! Identical. Another explosion of water, this time on the other side of the boat, even closer. Boat rocked again, harder this time. Spray hit my face, cold and shocking. I spun around, frantic now, scanning the surface, the woods around the shoreline. This wasn't a fish. Fish don't throw rocks. And that's what it sounded like now, something heavy hitting the water, causing that violent splash, that shockwave. Slowly, the realization dawned. Someone was throwing rocks at me from the woods. My blood turned to ice. My hunting instincts kicked in, but this wasn't hunting. This was something else, something hostile. I squinted, eyes straining, searching the dense tree line along the shore. Saw movement, just a flicker, a brief shifting of leaves deep in the shadows. Too far, too indistinct to make anything out, but it was there. Something was there. Watching, throwing rocks, deliberately, at me. Fear clamped down on me, cold and suffocating. This wasn't just unease, this was raw primal terror. Who was out there? Why were they throwing rocks? And why were they hiding? I shouted. Voice cracked, barely a whisper. Hello, is anyone there? Silence. Only the echoes of my own pathetic shout bouncing back from the trees. Listened, every nerve on high alert, straining to hear anything above the frantic hammering of my heart. Nothing, no response, but that feeling, the feeling of being watched, intensified. overwhelming now, like unseen eyes were boring into me from the darkness of the woods. Panic started to claw its way up my throat. This was wrong, so wrong. Out in the middle of the lake, boat rocking gently on the water, with something hidden in the woods throwing rocks at me. Something unseen, unheard except for the thrown stones. Something malicious. Why rocks? Why not just come out? What was out there? I didn't wait to find out. Pulled the oars towards me, frantic, clumsy, water splashing everywhere. Started rowing like a madman, back towards the boat ramp, towards my truck, towards civilization, towards anything that wasn't this lake, these woods, this unseen threat. Didn't look back, didn't dare, just rowed, muscles screaming, lungs burning, adrenaline coursing through me. Each stroke was driven by pure terror, by the desperate need to get away, to escape. Made it back to the ramp, hauled the boat out of the water, everything shaking, hands, legs, voice, if I could even speak properly anymore. Threw the boat onto the trailer, fumbled with the straps, movements jerky and uncoordinated. Got in the truck, slammed the door, locked it. Engine roared to life, put it in drive, tires spitting gravel, and sped away from New Limo Lake, away from those woods, away from whatever was hiding there. Didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the main road, gas station lights blinking in the distance. Pulled over, shaking still, breath coming in ragged gasps. Tried to make sense of it, tried to tell myself it was just kids messing around, teenagers being stupid. But I didn't believe it. The weight of the rocks hitting the water, the deliberate nature of it, the feeling of pure intent. It wasn't kids, something else. That night, back in Silent Creek, the old stories started creeping back into my mind. Stories you hear growing up in a place like this, rural, out of the way. Whispered tales, mostly dismissed as just that. Old wives' tales, spooky stories to scare kids around a campfire. But one story, a specific story, kept surfacing. About a monster. Not a monster in the fairy tale sense, but something wild. Something dangerous. Neighbors used to talk about it way back when. Farmers mostly, out past Sabre Rock, closer to Crow Mountain proper. Livestock disappearing. Not just chickens or small animals, but pigs. Big pigs, like over 150 pounds, some of them gone. Pens broken, fences torn down, but no tracks, no signs of dogs or coyotes or bears big enough to take down something like that and carry it off. Just gone, disappeared. And the whispers started. Monster in the woods, something living up on Crow Mountain, something that wasn't animal, wasn't human, something else. People talked in hushed tones about sounds in the night, strange howls that weren't dogs or wolves, shadows moving at the edge of the woods, glimpses of something big and dark and hairy disappearing into the trees. Most people just dismissed it as folklore, local legends growing over time. I used to. Always figured it was bears or mountain lions, something natural, exaggerated over generations of retelling. But after the rocks at the lake, after the knocks and the footsteps, after the constant feeling of being watched, those stories didn't seem so easily dismissed anymore. The fear I felt wasn't just fear of the unknown, it felt familiar, like a deep, ingrained fear. A fear passed down through generations of people who had lived in these woods, who had known something was out there, something old and wild and dangerous. Crow Mountain. They always said it was something up on Crow Mountain. Said the mountain was different, darker, older, like it held secrets, secrets that didn't want to be found, secrets that watched you when you got too close. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tossed and turned, images of the water exploding around the boat, the unseen presence in the woods, the old stories of the monster all swirling in my head. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window made me jump. Felt like something was out there, even now, watching, listening. Morning came grey and overcast, didn't lift the darkness that had settled over me. Couldn't shake the feeling, couldn't shake the fear. Had to go back. Had to try to understand. Stupid maybe, terrified definitely, but I had to know. Couldn't just leave it hanging there, that unanswered question, that cold dread gnawing at me. Drove back to New Limo Lake, parked at the boat ramp, same as yesterday, looked out at the water. Calm again, serene, like nothing had ever happened. Woods stood silent, dark and impenetrable along the shoreline. Sun was still hidden behind the clouds, making the woods even darker, shadows deeper. Got out of the truck, hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in, to drive away, to never come back. But something else drove me forward. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe just a stubborn refusal to be terrorized by something unseen, something unknown. Started walking towards the tree line, towards where I'd seen the movement yesterday, where the rocks had come from. Each step was heavy, reluctant. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my boots made my heart jump. Gun in my hand, safety off. Felt useless, really. Against what? I didn't even know. Reached the edge of the woods. Darkness swallowed me immediately. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of leaves. Air was damp, smelled of earth and decay. Silent, too silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence. Oppressive silence. Walked deeper in, slowly, carefully, scanning everything, every shadow, every tree trunk, every patch of undergrowth. Looking for... what? Footprints? Broken branches? Any sign of someone? Something? Nothing, just woods, thick, dense woods. Walked for what felt like hours, maybe only minutes, time losing all meaning in the grip of fear. Deeper and deeper, away from the lake, into the heart of the trees. Silence pressing down on me, the feeling of being watched intensifying with every step. Then I saw it, a clearing. Small, hidden in the deeper woods, a patch of open space where the trees thinned out a bit. Sunlight filtered weakly through the leaves, illuminating a small area of bare ground in the center of the clearing. And in the center of the clearing, it was like something out of a nightmare. A structure, roughly built, crude, made of branches and logs, leaning against a large oak tree. Not a fort, not a shelter. Something else. Something darker. It was like a crude cage. Or a shrine. Hard to tell. Branches woven together, forming a rough circle around a central area. Inside the circle, on the bare earth, bones. Animal bones. Lots of them. Scattered around, some broken, some gnawed clean. Deer bones, rabbit bones, small animal bones. And bigger bones. Too big for deer. Thicker, heavier. Pig bones? Maybe. Couldn't tell for sure. But there was something else too. Something hanging from one of the branches above the circle of bones. A piece of fabric. Dark, dirty, ripped. Cloth. Human cloth. Maybe. Couldn't tell in the dim light. But it was there, out of place, wrong. And then the smell hit me. A heavy, cloying stench. Rotting meat. Decay. Death. Stronger in the clearing. Thick in the air. Made my stomach churn. Made me want to vomit. Stood there, frozen, staring at the crude structure. The bones, the fabric, the smell. All the pieces clicking into place. The knocks. The footsteps. The rocks. The stories. The monster. It wasn't a monster in the way I imagined when I was a kid, but something wild. Something that built this thing. Something that collected bones. Something that watched. And then I heard it. A sound from behind me. In the woods, just beyond the edge of the clearing. A rustle of leaves, too loud for a squirrel, too heavy for a deer. The sound of footsteps, heavy footsteps, moving closer. I spun around, gun raised, heart hammering in my chest, ready to face whatever it was. Woods were dark, shadows moving, everything blurring. Couldn't see anything clearly, but the footsteps were getting closer. Heavier now, breaking twigs, snapping branches, coming right towards me. I stood there, frozen, gun shaking in my hand, breath caught in my throat, waiting, expecting. Dread building inside me, a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated terror. And then, nothing. Silence. Footsteps stopped. Woods were still. Only the beating of my own heart, echoing in my ears, stood there, listening, straining, waiting. Minutes stretched out, feeling like hours. Silence remained. Oppressive, suffocating silence, as if whatever was out there was just waiting, watching, knowing I was there. Then a sound. Not footsteps this time. A different sound, closer, right behind me. From inside the clearing, near the structure, near the bones. A sniff, like an animal sniffing the air. Heavy, wet sniff. Slowly, impossibly slowly, turned around. Heart stopped. Breath caught. Gun lowered, useless now, trembling in my hand. Standing right there at the edge of the clearing, between me and the crude structure of branches and bones. It was there, whatever it was. Standing in the shadows, just at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the darkness. But there, big, dark, shapeless almost, like a shadow given form. Couldn't make out details clearly in the dim light, but big, taller than a man, broader, covered in something dark. Hair, fur, couldn't tell, just presence. Massive, silent, watching, and eyes. 2 eyes, burning in the shadows. Glowering yellow eyes fixed on me. Unblinking, intelligent, malevolent, staring right through me. Felt cold, bone-chilling cold. Fear so intense it was almost paralyzing. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. Just stared back at those eyes, locked in a gaze of pure terror. For how long? Seconds, minutes. Time stopped. Only the eyes, burning into me, and the presence, heavy, oppressive, suffocating. Then it moved. Just a shift, a slight movement of the head, a tilting as if studying me, assessing me, deciding something, and then gone, just gone. No sound, no movement. 1 second those eyes were there, burning in the shadows. The next, empty darkness. Gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all. Just silence, and the woods, and the clearing, and the crude structure of bones, and me, standing there, frozen, heart hammering, breath coming in shallow gasps, shaking uncontrollably, waited. Minutes more, expecting it to reappear, expecting those eyes to burn back out of the shadows. But nothing. Silence, emptiness. Finally, slowly, backed away. 1 step at a time. Gun still shaking in my hand. Useless weight now. Never taking my eyes off the woods, off the shadows, expecting to see it reappear any second. Backed all the way out of the clearing, back into the denser trees, back towards the lake, back towards safety, if there was such a thing anymore. Didn't stop backing away until I was out of the woods, back at the boat ramp, back at my truck, back in the sunlight, back in reality, if this was reality. Got in the truck, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. Didn't stop this time. Drove straight out of Silent Creek, out of Ashwood County, out of those woods. Haven't been back since. Haven't wanted to. Still see those eyes sometimes when I close my eyes. Burning yellow eyes in the darkness. Still feel that cold dread, that suffocating fear when I think about that clearing, that structure of bones, that thing. Don't know what it was. Don't want to know. Just something in the woods. Something old, something wild, something wrong. Up on Crow Mountain, in the shadows, watching, and sometimes it throws rocks. That's all I know, that's all I saw, and honestly, that's more than enough. I hope to never see it again, ever. Story 13. Man, I still get chills thinking about it. It wasn't always like this out in Zaleski State Forests. Used to be peaceful, you know, just the usual wood sounds, birds chirping, squirrels rustling in the leaves, the wind whispering through the trees. My dad and his buddies, and then me and my friends after I got old enough, we've been hunting those woods for, hell, 3 generations probably. Knew every deer trail, every good spot to set up a stand. It was ours, felt like it anyway, even if it was state land. Then things started changing, slowly at first. It was probably a good 5, maybe 6 years ago now when we started noticing the weird stuff. Little things, you brush it off at first. A tree broken clean in half, but not from wind, like something just snapped it. Clareras where the underbrush was flattened, like something big had been sleeping there. Weird piles of rocks, perfectly stacked, not how they naturally fall. You'd find these constructions of branches woven together high up in trees sometimes, like giant bird nests, but way too big for any bird I ever heard of. We talked about it, of course. Guys would joke about Bigfoot or something. We laughed it off mostly. Woods get weird sometimes. Animals do strange things. Weather can be crazy. But it kept happening, more and more, and the feeling started to change from curiosity to unease. Then there were the smells. That was the first thing that really started to freak me out. You'd be walking through a perfectly normal part of the woods, smell of pine and damp earth, maybe a little deer scent. Then bam, it hits you, like rotten garbage, but mixed with something else. Like bad meat, real bad meat mixed with, I don't know, sewage maybe? Absolutely vile, and it would be just a pocket of it, thick and disgusting, then gone, just like that. No reason for it to be there, no trash, no dead animals nearby, nothing. Just this wave of pure stink that made your stomach turn. And the sounds, that's what really got under my skin. It started with just noises you couldn't quite place. Cracks and rustles when there shouldn't be anything around. You'd stop, listen, and it would stop too. Like something was watching you, waiting for you to move again. Then it got worse. This happened a couple of years ago, I guess. Late fall, hunting season was in full swing. I was out on my own that day. Usually we hunt in pairs, just a safety thing. But that day, everyone else had stuff going on. I figured I'd be fine. Knew the area like the back of my hand, daylight hunt, no big deal. Went out early, set up my stand near a little creek bed, waited for dawn. Saw a few does, let them pass. Wasn't looking for does that day. Morning was quiet, peaceful, beautiful even. Sunlight filtering through the trees, leaves changing colors, crisp air. For a while I forgot about all the weird stuff, just enjoyed being out there. Around mid-afternoon things got different. The woods got quiet, too quiet. The birds stopped singing, even the squirrels went silent. That's always a bad sign in the woods, like everything's holding its breath. You could feel it, this thick, heavy silence, pressing down on you. The air felt still, almost charged. I started feeling watched again. That feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even if you can't see anyone. I kept looking around, scanning the trees, the underbrush, but nothing, just shadows and trees and leaves. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to pack it in for the day. Didn't feel right anymore. Started climbing down from my stand, being extra careful, moving slow and quiet. Got to the ground, slung my rifle over my shoulder and started heading back towards the path, towards where I'd parked the truck. It was getting late, sun starting to dip below the trees. Long shadows stretching out, woods getting darker by the minute. I was walking down a narrow trail, thick woods on both sides, couldn't see more than a few yards in either direction. And that's when I heard it, something moving behind me, off the trail in the trees, heavy, like something big. At first I thought deer, a buck maybe, coming to the same creek I was hunting by earlier. Heart started to thump a little faster, thinking maybe I'd get a shot after all. I stopped, turned slowly, quiet as I could, listened. Leaves rustling, branches snapping lightly, getting closer. Sounded big, definitely bigger than a deer. Maybe a bear. We get black bears out in Zaleski, though not usually this far south. Then it happened. Not a rustle, not a snap, but a deep, guttural growl. Not like a dog growl or even a bear growl. Deeper, raspier, more primal. Like something ancient, something pissed off. It was low, vibrating in my chest, and it cut right through the woods, silence like a knife. My blood went cold. Every hair on my body stood up. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't anything I'd ever heard before in the woods. It was wrong. Then it roared. Not just a growl, but a full-on roar. Explosive, deafening, right behind me. Like it was 10 feet away. The sound ripped through the trees, echoing around me, bouncing off the hills. It wasn't animal, but it wasn't human either. It was something in between, something twisted and angry and hungry. Terror, pure, raw terror slammed into me. My legs turned to jelly, my breath hitched in my throat. I didn't think, I just reacted. I spun around, dropped my rifle, didn't even register doing it, and ran like hell. Blindly crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping my face, thorns tearing at my clothes, feet tripping on roots and rocks. Didn't care, just ran. The roar still echoed in my ears, even as I put distance between us. But it wasn't just the roar anymore. Now I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, coming after me. Branches breaking, undergrowth being trampled, the heavy thud of something running, faster than anything that big should be able to move, definitely faster than me. Panic clawed at my throat, choking me. I could hear it gaining, getting closer. The sound of it crashing through the woods was getting louder, closer. I stumbled, fell hard, slammed into the ground. Pain shot up my leg, twisted my ankle, I think. Didn't stop. Scrambled back to my feet, kept running, limping now, but still running. Adrenaline pumping so hard I could taste metal in my mouth. Another roar, closer now, deafeningly close. I risked a glance back over my shoulder, just for a split second. Dark shapes, moving fast between the trees, couldn't make out details, too dark, too fast. But big, definitely big, and too low to the ground to be a bear, and too bulky for a deer. My uncle, my dad's brother, he had a story about something like this back when he was a kid hunting these woods. Never told it much, always kind of hushed and nervous when it came up. Said he was out tracking a rabbit, got separated from his dad, and heard something growling in the thick brush. Said it sounded like a dog, but bigger, meaner. He ran too, ran all the way back to their truck, didn't stop until he was inside with the doors locked. He never forgot that sound. Never went back in those woods alone again. Always said there was something wrong out there, something old and nasty. I never really paid it much attention, kid stories, you know? Now I was thinking maybe Uncle Jerry wasn't so crazy after all. I burst out of the trees, finally, thank God, onto the old logging road, the main trail back to the parking area. Still running, heart hammering in my chest, lungs burning. Didn't look back this time, just ran. Put every bit of speed I had left into it, kept running all the way to the truck. Saw it parked up ahead, like a beacon in the fading light. Stumbled, almost fell again, but caught myself. Finally reached the truck, fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the lock. Got the door open, jumped inside, slammed it shut, locked all the doors, and leaned back against the seat, gasping for breath, chest heaving. Sat there for a minute, maybe more, just listening, waiting. Silence, finally. Just the wind in the trees, normal woods sounds again. The roaring, the crashing, it was gone. Just silence. Started the truck, threw it in reverse, and got the hell out of there. Didn't stop driving until I was out of the state forest, back on the main road, asphalt under the tires, houses and streetlights appearing. Felt a little safer then, a little. Drove home, didn't say a word to anyone, walked inside, went straight to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror. Face pale, eyes wide, pupils blown out, mud and scratches all over me, clothes ripped, bleeding from a dozen places. Looked like I'd been dragged through a briar patch. Took a shower, cleaned myself up, bandaged the cuts, still shaking inside. Couldn't stop replaying that roar, that feeling of being chased, the pure terror of it all. Never went back into those woods alone. Actually, haven't been back there at all, not really. Still hunt, but we found a new spot. Private land a friend of a friend owns, way on the other side of the county. Safer there, feels normal again. My son, he swears he saw something out there in Zaleski a few years back too. He was with me. We were driving out to set up cameras one evening, just before dark. He was in the back seat, looking out the window as we drove down the logging road. He suddenly got real quiet, then pointed out the window, whispered, "Dad, what's that?" I looked where he was pointing. Deep in the woods, between the trees. Just for a second I saw something move, big, dark, upright. Like a man, but huge, massive shoulders, thick neck, covered in dark fur or hair. It was just a glimpse, then it was gone, vanished back into the trees. I slammed on the brakes, truck skidded to a stop. "What was it?" I asked him, heart starting to pound again. He just stared at me, eyes wide with fear. I don't know, Dad," he whispered. "It looked like a bear, but standing up, or maybe a really big dog." He looked genuinely scared, said it looked like it was watching us. I put the truck in gear, gunned it, got out of there fast, didn't see anything else, didn't hear anything, but the feeling, that same feeling of being watched, of something wrong in those woods, it was back. And then there was another time. We were leaving late after checking cameras one night. Dark as hell out there, no moon. Driving slowly down the logging road, headlights cutting through the darkness. My son was with me again. We were talking about something stupid, football or video games, can't remember. Suddenly, the truck started to feel heavier, like we were driving through mud. I checked the mirrors, thinking maybe we had a flat tire or something. Everything looked normal, but the truck was definitely laboring, engine straining. Then the headlights caught something in the rearview mirror, a shadow just outside the edge of the light, back in the trees, moving alongside us. Too big to be a deer, too dark to be anything normal. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, and then it stepped out of the shadows, right into the beam of the headlights, right behind the truck. Giant shadow, hulking shape, just a few feet behind the bumper. Couldn't see details, just a massive, dark shape. And then it growled, that same deep, guttural growl, the one I remembered from the woods, the one that still haunted my nightmares. Right behind the truck, close enough to touch. We both heard it, clear as day, even over the engine noise. It wasn't like an animal growl. It was deliberate, threatening. I floored it. Truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. Looking in the rearview mirror, the shadow stayed right behind us, keeping pace. For a few terrifying seconds it was right there, chasing us, growling. Then as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Just vanished back into the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we were home. Didn't talk about it much, not really. Just knew there was something out there in those woods, something we didn't understand, something bad. I still can't explain any of it. The noises, the smells, the feelings, the shadows. Don't know what it was that chased me that day, or what my son and I saw or heard. Just know it was real, too real. And I know I'm not going back in those woods alone, ever. Zaleski State Forests. They're not the same anymore. Something's changed out there. Something's woken up. And I don't want to be around when it gets hungry again. I just hope whatever it is stays out there, stays in the shadows, and leaves the rest of us alone. But something tells me it won't. Story 14. Okay, so listen, this is going to sound crazy. And honestly, even now, years later, when I think about it, a cold sweat breaks out. I still can't explain it, and I've stopped even trying to, really. People just look at you sideways if you talk about it too much. It was November of 2013, just a normal Saturday. My boy Josh, he was maybe 10, 11 years old then, really into being outdoors. He was always on me to take him hunting or fishing, anything to get him away from video games. So I promised him we'd go squirrel hunting. Just a father-son thing, you know? Keep him out of trouble, teach him some things. We headed out to this old tree farm near Oak Grove, North Carolina. It's kind of rural out there, lots of woods and farmland. We got there early. Morning still had that bite of cold to it. You could see your breath in the air. Perfect squirrel hunting weather, crisp and quiet. The farm was mostly pines, row after row of them, pretty dense in some spots, spaced out in others. We walked in a little ways, maybe a quarter-mile, just getting away from the road noise. Josh was excited, bouncing ahead a little, his .22 rifle slung over his shoulder. I had my shotgun, loaded with birdshot. Wasn't looking for anything big, just squirrels, like I said. We started moving slowly through the trees, scanning the branches. Squirrels are pretty noisy usually. You can hear them rustling around in the leaves, chattering at each other. But it was oddly quiet that morning. Too quiet, maybe. Looking back, that should have been my first clue that something wasn't quite right. Usually, those woods are alive with sounds, even in late fall. But this morning, it was almost muted. We're walking, scanning up into the canopies, trying to spot a bushy tail flicking. Josh is pointing out this and that, just kid stuff, leaves turning color, funny-shaped trees, you know. And then, I don't know what it was, some kind of movement caught my eye, way off, maybe 100 yards or so, deeper into the trees. It was a pine tree, taller than the rest, and something just looked off about it. I stopped, told Josh to hold up. "Hang on a sec, buddy," I said. "Did you see something over there?" He squinted, looked in the direction I was looking. "Nah, just a tree, Dad." Typical kid, not paying attention. But I knew I'd seen something. A flicker of darker shade in the green needles. I pulled out my phone. Yeah, I know, sounds dumb maybe, bringing a phone hunting, but it's just habit these days, right? Plus, good for emergencies. And I like to take pictures sometimes, of the woods, the animals, whatever. So I zoomed in. My phone wasn't some fancy new thing, but the camera was decent enough. I zoomed in on that pine tree, and that's when I saw it. At first it was just a dark shape, high up in the tree, nestled in a fork of branches. Kind of bulky. Too bulky to be a squirrel, even a nest. And it was dark, really dark, against the green of the pine needles. My heart started to beat a little faster. Just curiosity, you know? What the heck is that? I took a picture, zoomed in as much as I could and clicked. The picture on my phone screen was grainy, pixelated from the zoom, but it was definitely something. It looked like an animal, a large, dark animal, perched in the tree. I zoomed in again, digital zoom now, so it got even grainier, but clearer at the same time somehow. And that's when I saw the shape start to resolve itself. It wasn't just a dark blob. It had form, rounded shoulders, a hunched posture, and then the head. It turned its head, slowly, toward me. And that's when I really saw it. The face. It was monkey-like. Definitely primate, no question about it, but bigger than any monkey I'd ever seen, and different. Dark fur, almost black, thick, matted looking. A flat face, kind of pushed in with a broad nose, and these eyes. Oh, those eyes, dark, deep set, and they were looking right at me. Even on the grainy phone screen, I could feel them looking right through me. I took another picture, quickly, just instinctive. Click. This time, even more zoomed in, trying to get a better look at the face, and it was clearer now, even with the graininess. Definitely a face. Not like a bear, not like a dog, nothing I'd ever seen in those woods. Monkey-like, but bigger, more solid. And those eyes, still staring. That local folklore about Nabi, the Bigfoot-type creature people talked about around here. Just a whisper, really. Mostly old wives' tales. I'd always thought it was nonsense. Hillbilly stories, you know, but seeing that thing on my phone screen, it sent a shiver down my spine, a real primal kind of shiver. Suddenly, Nabi wasn't so funny anymore. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, but bears don't sit in trees like that. And the face, it wasn't bear-like at all. Maybe a really big dog somehow climbed up there? No, that didn't make sense either. And the size, I tried to estimate it from the photos based on the tree branches. It was hard to say exactly, but it looked tall. Taller than a dog, taller than a person sitting down. I guessed maybe 5, 6 feet tall if it stood up. Hard to tell for sure in that crouch position. And then I saw something else. In the second picture, when I zoomed in on the chest area, it was round. And in proportion to the size, it looked feminine. Like breasts. Yeah, I know, sounds crazy even saying it, but that's what it looked like. This creature, whatever it was, looked like it had female characteristics. I almost didn't want to believe it. Bigfoot stories. Female Bigfoot. It was getting weirder and weirder. Josh was getting impatient now. "Dad, what are you looking at?" He was tugging on my jacket sleeve. I snapped out of it, lowered my phone. Nothing, buddy. Just thought I saw a big squirrel nest." Lame excuse, I know, but I didn't want to freak him out. Not yet, anyway. But I knew I had to see it for myself. Those pictures on my phone were one thing. Digital images. Could be anything. Tricks of the light. Shadows. I needed to see it with my own eyes. "Josh," I said, trying to sound casual, "let's go check out that tree over there. See if there are any squirrels hiding in it." He shrugged, still a little confused, but he followed me. We started walking toward that pine tree, slowly, quietly. My heart was pounding now, not just curiosity anymore, but a real sense of apprehension, maybe even fear. This was going way beyond squirrel hunting. I unslung my shotgun, not pointing it at anything, just held it loosely in my hand. Josh looked at me, eyes widening a bit. "Dad, what's wrong?" He could sense something was off. Kids always can. "Nothing's wrong, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Just being careful. Never know what's out here in the woods." Another weak excuse. We got closer to the tree, closer and closer. The silence in the woods seemed to deepen. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence. The air felt heavy, still, almost charged, like before a thunderstorm, but there were no clouds in the sky. We were maybe 50 yards from the tree now. I could see the branches where I'd seen it in the pictures. Still nothing obvious, just pine needles and branches. But I kept scanning, my eyes searching, trying to find that dark shape again. 30 yards, 20. We were right under the tree now, looking up into the branches. Nothing, just empty branches swaying slightly in the breeze. I circled the tree slowly, scanning every branch, every fork, every shadow. Nothing. It was gone, completely gone. "See, Dad? Just a tree," Josh said, a little relieved maybe. "Told you." But I wasn't convinced. I pulled out my phone again, brought up the pictures. There it was, on the screen, clear as day. The dark shape, the monkey face, the eyes staring back at me. I looked from the phone screen back up into the empty branches, back and forth. It made no sense. But I saw it," I mumbled, more to myself than to Josh. "I saw it right there, in that tree, just minutes ago." I walked all the way around the tree again, widening the circle, looking on the ground, in the bushes around it, thinking maybe it had climbed down and run off. But there was nothing. No broken branches, no rustled leaves, no footprints in the soft pine needle duff. Absolutely no sign that anything had been there, let alone a creature that size. It was like it had vanished into thin air. I stood there for a long time, just staring at that tree, phone still in my hand, the picture of the thing staring back at me. Complete and utter confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. How could something that big just disappear like that, with no sound, no trace, nothing? Josh was getting restless. "Dad, can we just go squirrel hunting now? This is boring." Kids, right? They just don't get it, but maybe it was better he didn't get it. Maybe it was better he just thought his dad was being weird about a tree. Yeah, sure, buddy," I said, finally snapping out of my daze. Let's go somewhere else. Maybe the squirrels are better deeper in the woods." Anything to get away from that tree. We walked away, deeper into the tree farm. But I kept looking back at that pine tree. Even when it was just a speck in the distance, I could still see it in my mind. that dark shape in the branches, those eyes staring at me, and the silence of the woods. It still hung in the air, thick and unsettling. We didn't see any squirrels that day, not a single one. The woods remained eerily quiet. Josh kept asking what was wrong, why I was so quiet, so jumpy. I just told him I was tired, that maybe the squirrels were all hiding today. He didn't really buy it, but he let it go. We went home early. I didn't tell my wife anything about it, didn't want to sound like a crazy person. I looked at those pictures on my phone over and over that night, zooming in, brightening them, trying to find any clue, any explanation. But there was nothing, just the same grainy images of something in a tree. And then nothing. I've shown those pictures to a few people, close friends. Most of them just laugh it off. Shadows, man, tricks of the light. You imagined it. One or two of them got a little quieter, said it looked strange. One guy even knew about the Nabi stories, said maybe I'd actually seen something. But he didn't really believe it either. And honestly, I don't know what to believe. Part of me wants to think it was just my imagination, stress, whatever. But then I look at those pictures again, and I remember that feeling, standing under that tree, the silence, the emptiness. And I know deep down, I know I saw something real, something unexplained. It's been years now, like I said. I still go hunting sometimes out in those woods, but I never go back to that tree farm near Oak Grove. And I never go alone. And every time I'm in the woods, I can't help but look up into the trees, just checking, making sure. And sometimes when it's quiet, really quiet like it was that morning, I get that feeling again, that cold shiver down my spine, like maybe, just maybe, it's still out there, watching. And I still can't explain how it just vanished. 1 minute it was there, looking right at me, and the next, gone, just gone, like it was never even there at all. And that's the part that really gets to you, you know, the not knowing, the complete and utter mystery of it. It's like a piece of reality just broke for a little while, and I was there to see it. And I still have these damn pictures on my phone, digital ghosts of something I can't explain, and I'm pretty sure I never will. Story 15. I drove down early Friday morning. The drive itself was already calming. Green fields, small towns I'd never heard of. The sky was overcast, but in a peaceful, moody way, not angry. I got to the trailhead for North Country Trail near Gloucester around midday. It was a weekday, so parking was practically empty, just a couple of other cars. Good, less people. I double-checked my pack, everything felt right. Water, food, tent, first aid kit. The little 9mm I always carry when I'm out in the sticks. Just in case, you know? Never needed it. Never even pointed it at anything except a target at the range. But it's there. Peace of mind. I started walking. The trail was nice, quiet, exactly what I wanted. The forest was thick, tall trees everywhere, a lot of undergrowth. It had rained the past few days. Everything was damp and smelled like wet earth and pine. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, like the premise said, deeper in, further away from the road. And then I found it, just like I'd been hoping. A small lake, more like a pond, really, maybe 100 feet across, tucked away, completely surrounded by trees. Perfect. Isolated as hell. I picked a spot near the edge of the water that looked flat enough to pitch my tent and started to unpack. The silence was amazing, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was exactly what I needed. I was feeling good, finally starting to relax. I laid out my ground sheet and was about to start setting up the tent when I heard it. Whispering. It was faint, barely audible, like the wind through the leaves, but it wasn't the wind. It was voices, whispering, hushed, like people talking quietly nearby. But there was something off about it. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized, actually. It sounded foreign. Not like Spanish or French or anything like that. Weirder, almost guttural, with sounds I couldn't really place. My first thought was, people. Had someone else camped here already? Maybe not right here exactly, but close enough I could hear them. It seemed unlikely. This place felt really secluded, but I guess it was possible. Maybe there were houses nearby, further into the woods than I thought, even though the trail was supposed to be pretty remote. I decided to investigate later. My priority right then was to get the tent up before it got dark and to try and get a fire going. The weather forecast had said it was supposed to stay dry today, but with the recent rain, everything was still pretty damp. I figured a fire would be key for warmth and for cooking later. I started looking around for firewood. That was when I realized things might be a bit harder than I'd planned. Everything on the ground was soaked, like properly saturated. Rotting logs, twigs, leaves, everything was heavy with moisture. I kicked at a log with my boot, hoping to break off some drier wood from the inside, but no luck. It was just mushy. As I was bending down, trying to find something, anything even remotely dry enough to use as kindling, I heard it again. The sound of an axe. A sharp, distinct thwack sound echoing through the trees. It sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, maybe in the direction opposite from the trail I'd come from. That was weird. Really weird. Who would be chopping wood out here so deep in the national forest and with an axe? It's not like there are designated campsites with fire pits or anything here. Campfires were allowed as far as I knew, but you were supposed to use down wood, not chop live trees. And why so deep in? Then the whispers started again, louder this time, still unintelligible, still that weird foreign sound, but closer, much closer. Like they were just on the other side of the trees, maybe 50, 60 feet away. It wasn't just one voice now, it sounded like multiple. 2, maybe 3, whispering at the same time. It made my skin crawl a little. My patience was starting to fray. Trying to get a fire going in wet woods is always a pain in the ass. And now, with these weird sounds, I stood up straight, frustrated, brushing my hands on my pants, just as I was about to go and scout around a little, see if I could find some drier stuff, or maybe try and figure out where those voices were coming from. I heard something else. Heavy footsteps, crashing through the undergrowth above me, not like someone walking on the trail kind of footsteps. These were heavy, loud, breaking branches, crunching leaves, and definitely coming from upslope on the little ridge that ran along the backside of my campsite. They were moving fast, coming right towards me. Adrenaline kicked in instantly.